Chapter 708. The news that Jean Hauser received was that two people suspected to be Jean Kuhn and Jean Li appeared in a villa near the sanatorium. He knew that there was a property there that belonged to Jean Li. If it was really in their place, then it would be a piece of cake to get it. After driving for about 40 minutes, they were about to arrive at Jean Li's villa. In the villa, Jean Kuhn and Jean Li didn't seem surprised by Jean Hauser's arrival at all. Especially Jean Kuhn. His old face, which was covered in age spots, had a strange smile on it. He looked at Jean Hauser. He was already a candle in the wind. Another stroke and the stimulation almost made him die. But he was Jean Kuhn after all. He brought himself back to life. Looking at Jean Hauser, his face was full of pride. Jean Hauser, you still have the face to come? Jean Li stood up. One of his hands was broken. Although he had a prosthetic limb, it couldn't be as nimble as a real hand. This was also the reason why he hated Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser didn't even look at them. He only stared at Jean Kuhn. He spent so much effort to bring you out just to bring you here? Instead of sending you back to the Jean family? What a waste of my expression. I said I was here. Jean Kuhn glared at Jean Hauser with a cold gaze. I, of course, came here because I have something to do. Return to the Jean family? You wanted to. But Jean Hauser surrounded the Jean family like an iron bucket. If he hadn't thought of a way this time, he wouldn't have been able to come out. Thinking of this, Jean Kuhn hated him even more. His eyes were filled with coldness as if he wanted to kill Jean Hauser. Something to do? Who's going to help you? Uncle Chi? Before Jean Kuhn could say anything, Jean Li smiled when he heard his words. Uncle Chi can naturally help Grandpa. After all, he's someone who can represent Grandpa. Really? Jean Hauser smiled and walked to the sofa opposite Jean Li and sat down. Then let's guess what you want Uncle Chi to do. For example, take back the Jean family. Let others know that you plan to hand the Jean family over to this piece of trash? Who are you scolding? Jean Li couldn't take it anymore and wanted to rush up, but the bodyguard behind Jean Hauser stood forward, so Jean Li couldn't win. As soon as they came out today, Jean Kuhn couldn't wait to find some of his trusted aides. After finding them, he didn't need them to protect him. He knew that Jean Hauser would not let him die so easily. Therefore, he asked everyone to follow Uncle Chi as long as he took back the Jean family. What was Jean Hauser's people worth? Jean Hauser, don't be too proud. After today your horse will have nothing. Is that so? Jean Hauser nodded. Why don't we wait here for a while? Look who has nothing. Jean Kuhn's eyes widened. He looked at Jean Hauser and suddenly had a bad premonition. Soon his phone rang. On the other end of the phone was one of his trusted aides other than Uncle Chi. Old master, Uncle Chi ran away. What? Jean Kuhn's hoarse voice almost broke. She didn't believe him at all. What did you say? Uncle Chi has been captured. Jean Kuhn could no longer hear what was said on the other side of the phone. He widened his eyes and looked at Jean Hauser. What did you do? It was impossible for Uncle Chi to betray him. He was suddenly captured. Jean Hauser must have done something. Jean Hauser smiled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. His expression was cold. You should ask, what did Uncle Chi do? What did he mean? Jean Kuhn's eyes widened. Jean Hauser, what did you do to Uncle Chi? Jean Li's arrogant voice didn't enter Jean Hauser's ears. He looked at Jean Kuhn. Or did you ask Uncle Chi to do something? Jean Kuhn's methods were vicious and ruthless. After so many years, he had gotten rid of all those people who had gotten in his way. The most important person among them was naturally Uncle Chi. After decades, how many people's blood had Uncle Chi's hands been stained with? Even Jean Kuhn didn't know. Don't worry. Soon it will be your turn. Just like every time in the past, Jean Kuhn was extremely angry at Jean Hauser. However, he quickly came back to his senses. Do you think you've won? He forced himself to focus and glared at Jean Hauser. Why don't you call and ask where your woman is now? Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes. His phone rang at this moment. It was the bodyguard he had sent to follow Shi Mengwan to protect her. He didn't know what was said on the other end of the phone, but Jean Hauser's brows furrowed tightly. He raised his head and looked at Jean Kuhn. What did you do? Jean Kuhn seemed to know what the call was about. He was also looking at him with a gloomy smile on his face. Your woman is in my hands. Jean Kuhn sneered and said. His hoarse voice was very unpleasant to the ears. The content that was revealed was even more unpleasant to the ears. Tang Hua, who was following beside Jean Hauser, looked at Jean Hauser worriedly. Jean Hauser hung up the phone and stared straight at Jean Kuhn. What did you say? I said, your woman is in my hands now. Jean Cohen felt that he had finally been able to relax. If you don't want anything to happen to your woman, then get someone to release Uncle Chi and hand over the Jean family. Jean Hauser sat there and looked at the proud and arrogant grandfather and grandson in front of him. He suddenly smiled. What makes you think that I will hand over the entire Jean family for a woman? You won't. It's just a woman. Compared to the entire Jean family, she's really insignificant. Moreover, the Jean family is in my hands. How many women can I want? Jean Cohen shook his head. He looked at Jean Hauser as if he was looking at him, but at the same time, it didn't seem like he was looking at him. No, you will. I didn't know that you know me so well. Jean Hauser's face darkened. You're sure about something that even I'm not sure about? Of course I'm sure, because you're just like your father. Stupid and ridiculous. You'll abandon everything for a woman. At the thought of Jean Lai, Jean Cohen's expression turned ugly. Is that so? Jean Hauser's eyes darkened. But I'm not my father. I refuse. You? Jean Cohen didn't believe his ears. I don't believe it at all. You did it on purpose, you did it on purpose. Do you think I'll let that woman go just because you said that? You've forgotten one thing. I'm not my father. He stood up and looked at Jean Cohen. Don't worry, Uncle Chi isn't the only one with a criminal record. The police are already on their way. I originally thought that at your age I would have a greater sense of accomplishment if I let you stay in the sanatorium and watch me destroy the Jean family bit by bit. But now you'd better go to prison and watch me destroy the Jean family. Jean Hauser. Jean Li stood up. Don't be too smug. Let me tell you, if you don't hand over the Jean family, your woman is dead. Jean Cohen couldn't hold on any longer. He looked at Jean Hauser. I don't believe it. A police siren sounded outside the door. Jean Hauser turned around and walked out. Jean Cohen kept shaking his head behind him. I don't believe it. I don't believe that you really don't care. Do you really not care about that woman's life or death? Impossible. Jean Hauser should be as stupid as his father. He should be as stupid as his father. He should abandon the Jean family for a woman. He should be the same as his father. Jean Cohen's body softened. He began to feel uncomfortable again. But what was even more uncomfortable was to come. When Jean Hauser walked to the door, he stopped for a moment. He turned around and looked at Jean Cohen, whose face was ashen and who was about to faint. All right, I forgot to say one thing. You can call your people and ask who the woman he kidnapped is. Jean Cohen's eyes widened. At the same time, the phone in Jean Li's hand rang. The voice on the other end of the phone was full of panic. Old master. We kidnapped the wrong person. The person we kidnapped isn't that woman. Jean Cohen could no longer hear what was said after that. His eyes rolled back and he fainted. Jean Li wanted to do something else, but the police outside the door had already come in. He began to retreat. I didn't commit a crime. Why are you arresting me? I didn't commit a crime. You can't arrest me. I want to find a lawyer. Jean Hauser couldn't hear what he said after that, and he didn't want to hear it. After getting into the car, the convoy quickly headed towards the city center. Shi Mingwan looked at the office environment in front of her, which was more than twice the size of her studio in Lin City, but the decoration style was the same. Other than satisfaction and surprise, there was nothing else in her eyes. She didn't know how long it would take to renovate this place, but it definitely couldn't be done in a day or two. This time, Jean Hauser had only gone to look for her during this period of time, which meant that he had been preparing for a long time. She suddenly believed what he had said about Chen Feifei. He had really started to think about breaking off the engagement a long time ago and then being with her. Otherwise he wouldn't be so attentive. Especially when she saw a few of her designs in the exhibition hall. Other than the ones she had participated in the French competition last time, there were also a few that she had participated in the domestic competition. Other than the award-winning works, there were even some of her early and slightly immature designs. All of them could be seen here. She suddenly wanted to see Jean Hauser very, very much. She wanted to ask the bodyguard where Jean Hauser was. If possible, she wanted to go directly to Jean Hauser's place. She wanted to go find him. She really liked this gift too much. When she turned around, she realized that Jean Hauser had arrived at some point in time. She quickly went forward. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms. You're here? When Jean Hauser saw her, he knew that under his arrangements, nothing would happen to Shi Mingwan, but he still couldn't help but reach out and hug her tightly. His heart, which had been hanging in the air all along the way, finally relaxed a little. She was still here. She was safe and sound. Jean Cohen didn't affect her. His people didn't succeed either. She was still fine. This was good, very good. Hauser? He hugged her too tightly, making it hard for her to breathe. She couldn't help but look up at him. Jean Hauser finally let go of her. He looked at his surroundings and looked at her again. And how is it? Do you like it? Shi Mingwan nodded heavily and hugged his waist. I like it, I really like it. It was exactly what she had imagined the studio to look like. It was bigger, better, and the style was more suitable. If there's anything else you don't think is suitable, you can tell Tang Hua directly and ask him to get someone to change it. There's nothing inappropriate. Everything is suitable. When he said that it was being renovated, she really thought that it was a studio that was still being renovated. But who knew that he would give her such a big surprise? How was this still being renovated? She could just come in and work. It's good that it's suitable. Jean Hauser hugged her waist and gently stroked her hair with his hand. There was a faint smile on his face. I asked Tang Hua to recruit people. The preliminary exam has already been passed. If you're at ease, let Tang Hua do the second exam and interview. If you're not at ease, you can do it yourself. The information is ready. It's in your office in front. He had thought of something for her that she hadn't thought of. As for the studio in Lin City, there's no need to end it. You can arrange for people you trust. Continue to operate as a branch. There are also the 2 contract factories that you contacted. If you can't handle the work in Lin City, I asked Tang Hua to buy 2 clothing factories in Qing City. From now on they're all yours. Jean Hauser's words made Shi Mingwan's eyes widen. 2 clothing factories. What did that mean? If he said he would buy them, he would buy them. Jean Hauser, you'll spoil me rotten if you do this. She only thought that a factory would be willing to split out a production line to make the clothes she designed, but she never thought that she would be able to have a clothing factory herself. You're spoiling me rotten just like that? Jean Hauser felt that she was too easily satisfied. Since you want to be big, of course you'll be more at ease with your own factory. At least you can control more. Okay. He was so thoughtful. What else was Shi Mingwan not satisfied with? She tiptoed and kissed him on the lips. Thank you, Hauser. Jean Hauser looked at her and held her hand in his. I don't want your thanks. What's mine is yours. You never have to say thanks to me. Because of his words, Shi Mingwan reached out to hold his face. She looked at him fixedly and met his eyes. Jean Hauser, are you really Jean Hauser? Was the man who was so good at saying sweet words, thinking for her, and thinking of all her problems really her dear brother? Was he really the Jean Hauser who used to be as cold as ice to her? If I'm not Jean Hauser, who am I? Shi Mingwan suddenly smiled. Yes, if he wasn't her dear brother, who else could he be? Or do you not like me like this? I like it. Shi Mingwan hugged him tightly. I like it too much. It's good that you like it. As he spoke, he snapped his fingers. Soon, someone brought in a large bouquet of roses. He knelt down on one knee in front of her. He handed the roses in his hand to her. Wanwan, marry me. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. She didn't believe that there would be so many surprises today. Jean Hauser, you, marry me? I know it's very difficult for you to let go of everything in Lin City and come here with me. But I still selfishly hope that you will agree to marry me. I promise that I will always treat you well and take care of you for the rest of your life. Shi Mingwan covered her lips and looked at the large bouquet of roses. Her eyes turned red and tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. I promise you. Jean Hauser watched as she took the bouquet of roses and took out a ring from it. It wasn't the big diamond ring she had imagined. Instead, it was a very ordinary diamond ring that looked a little old. The diamond was small and not big. But the luster was moving. The style was also very classic. Jean Hauser put the ring on Shi Mingwan's hand. His slender fingers gently pointed at the surface of the ring. This is considered an engagement ring. I've already asked someone to make the wedding ring. It will take some time before it can be sent back. It's okay. Shi Mingwan didn't mind. Jean Hauser didn't look at her. He just stared at the ring. This ring is my mother's relic. It's the wedding ring she used to marry my father. Shi Mingwan looked at this extraordinary ring. At this moment she could almost feel the weight of this ring. Actually, there's no need to specially order a wedding ring. This one is also very good. No. You deserve better. Jean Hauser held her hand as if he had thought of something. Let's go. I'll take you somewhere? Where to? You'll know when you come with me, Jean Hauser said. Shi Mingwan looked at him and followed him with the large bouquet of roses in her arms. They went out together. Jean Hauser sat in the car with a serious expression. He picked up the phone a few times, but Shi Mingwan almost didn't hear him speak. It was just a simple, "And okay, I got it." Such a response, such a Jean Hauser, made her feel as if he had returned to when they first met. She couldn't help but reach out to hold John House's hand. John House turned around to look at her. When he met the worry in her eyes, he patted her hand. John House? Are you okay? I'm fine. John House held her hand tightly, and the expression on his face was a little complicated. He seemed to be relaxed, yet nervous, yet in pain, yet happy. Sure Mingwan couldn't tell, but John House's gaze made her heart ache. She couldn't help but hold his hand and snuggle into his arms at the same time. I'll be with you. I'll always be with you. John House didn't say anything more. He just pressed his chin against the top of her head and smelled the faint fragrance on her body. The urge to kill slowly relaxed. Jean Cohen wasn't locked up in the end. Because he fainted again. This time he probably wouldn't be able to save him. Uncle Chi refused to confess what he had done, even if the evidence was irrefutable. But regardless of whether he confessed or not, he would probably end up in prison. As for Jean Li and Zhang Yang, without John Cohen they were nothing to be afraid of. The remaining Bai Shuqiao and Zhang Lai, the Bai family wanted to help Bai Shuqiao seize power with the business travel package and regain control of the Zhang family. But the Bai family had been arrogant enough for the past few years. In the past few days he had been speeding up his actions to deal with the Bai family. He believed that in less than a week the Bai family would go bankrupt. If the Bai family went bankrupt, Bai Shuqiao would no longer have any bargaining chips or loyalty. Zhang Lai would lose such help, and Zhang Li and Zhang Yang wouldn't be able to live up to expectations. The Zhang family could be considered to be completely finished. And his cautiousness and forbearance over the past few months had also come to an end. The police were already on their way to the Zhang family's mansion. It wouldn't take long for the Zhang family to be sealed up. After all, Zhang Cohen, Uncle Chi and Zhang Lai's hands weren't clean. Without the Zhang family might be even worse than ordinary people. His long-cherished wish had finally come true. Chapter 709. Shi Mingwan, who was sitting in the car, only saw that it was a mountain. The mountain wasn't very high, and the car drove straight up the mountain. They were now halfway up the mountain. Following Zhang Houze out of the car, he held her hand and walked to a small path on the side. Shi Mingwan had a faint premonition in her heart. She knew why he brought her here and what he wanted to do. Sure enough, after going around a small hill, she saw a very grand and magnificent graveyard. Someone behind Zhang Houze handed him 3 bouquets of chrysanthemums. Wanwan, this is my mom. Shi Mingwan looked at the cemetery. Discovered that the cemetery is not just for one person. On both sides were 2 larger tombstones and on the right was a woman. The woman in the black and white photo was smiling brightly, and her eyebrows and eyes were somewhat similar to Zhang House's. On it was written, Mother Qiao Ruoliu's grave. Zhang Houze stood there sobbing. Was this Zhang House's mother? She looked at Zhang Houze and then at the other 2 graves. The larger one on the right read, Father Zhang Lie's grave. It was also erected by Zhang Houze. Zhang Lai on the tombstone looked 70% similar to Zhang Houze. He was the combination of Zhang Lai and Qiao Ruoliu. The word Qiao made Shi Mingwan take another look at Zhang Houze. Qiaoze? However, what attracted Shi Mingwan's attention the most was the smaller tombstone in the middle. Sister Zhang Jiao's tomb. These simple words made Shi Mingwan's eyes widen. She looked at Zhang Houze in disbelief. According to the time on these 3 tombstones, Zhang Houze lost all his family in one day. Parents' sister. Zhang Houze placed the flowers in front of the 3 tombstones, then squatted down in front of the tombstones. He reached out and stroked the tombstone in the middle. His gaze was sorrowful and distant. Actually, I don't know if she's a younger sister or a younger brother. I only hope that she's a younger sister. Zhang Cohen valued men over women. He also had a lot of illegitimate children, but most of them didn't get his approval. It was impossible for him to have a good relationship with those girls from the Zhang family. He had hoped to have a younger sister, and he had also thought that he would have one. If not for that shot. No, it wasn't just one shot, it was many shots. Shi Mingwan didn't quite understand the first sentence, but she reacted to the second sentence. She widened her eyes and looked at Zhang Houze. Her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. Zhang Houze pressed his forehead against the tombstone. Actually, he knew that there was nothing there. Whether it was his sister's grave or his parents', they were all empty. Seriously speaking, these could only be regarded as cenotaphs. Because whether it was Qiao Ruoliu or Zhang Lai, their corpses were not here. Shi Mingwan looked at the 3 tombstones and her lips moved. She remembered that Zhang Houze said that his mother was dead, but he didn't say that his father was also gone. Dad, Mom, I'm here to see you. Zhang Houze took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the tombstone. Dad. Mom, I brought Wanwan to see you. Wanwan is the girl I mentioned to you before I came up here. I've asked her to marry me. John Hauser seemed to have thought of something. He pressed his forehead against the tombstone, and his gaze was deep. He used to have a happy family. His mother was an extremely ordinary primary school teacher. But she was very gentle. She liked children and liked to laugh. She came from an ordinary background, but she accidentally met Jean Lai, the young master of the Jean family, who was all-powerful in Qing City. At first she didn't know Jean Lai's identity. Jean Lai liked Qiao Ruoliu like a demon. After knowing that his father wouldn't agree, he naturally eloped with Qiao Ruoliu. Qiao Ruoliu's mother was from Lin City, so the two of them settled down in Lin City. Qiao Ruoliu taught, while Jean Lai found a job as an ordinary employee. The two of them didn't have much money, but they were very happy. Especially after they had Jean Hauser, this happiness became 3 parts. As an elementary school teacher, Qiao Ruoliu liked children very much, especially her son. She would hold him in her arms and read to him. When he slowly grew up, she taught him to play the piano and sing. As for Jean Lai, after getting rid of the controlling Jean Kuan, he became an ordinary father. He would bring Jean Hauser to the park and carry his son on his shoulders. He would bring Jean Hauser to play basketball and football together. That period of childhood was the happiest time of Jean Hauser's life. He had a very happy family. This kind of happiness lasted until he was 9 years old. When he was 9 years old, Qiao Ruoliu became pregnant again. This was a very happy news for the Jean family. At that time she was only 2 months pregnant and didn't look pregnant. However, Jean Lai and Jean Hauser already knew. They were looking forward to it and were very happy. The arrival of a new life. When Qiao Ruoliu asked the father and son if they liked a son or a daughter, the two of them said that they liked a girl. I'm going to be an elder brother. Jean Hauser was very happy at that time. This kind of happiness made him and Jean Lai plan every day how to dote on her if they had a younger sister. He had a lot of plans how to take care of this younger sister, how to be a good elder brother. Jean Hauser would never forget what happened on the day of the accident. Because that day was Qiao Ruoliu's birthday. Jean Hauser wanted to give Qiao Ruoliu a birthday present. That day happened to be Saturday. Jean Hauser had prepared the present the day before and wanted to hide it to surprise Qiao Ruoliu. No matter how he thought about it, he didn't know where to hide it. In the end, he chose to hide it in a cabinet in the living room. The cabinet was very big. Qiao Ruoliu had just cleaned it out the day before and said that she wanted to put something in it. At that time, Jean Hauser was still small, so he could hide inside. He hid it well and planned to give Qiao Ruoliu a surprise when his mother and father entered the house. However, he didn't expect that Qiao Ruoliu and Jean Lai didn't come back, but Jean Kuan came first. Jean Kuan brought Uncle Qi and many people in black clothes into his house. He saw it through the gap of the cabinet door. He, who had never seen such a scene, was so scared that he didn't dare to make a sound. Jean Kuan asked his men to search around the house, but he didn't know what to search for. It was only when a man in black walked over to open the cabinet that he was in that he was scared out of his wits. At this moment, Jean Lai and Qiao Ruoliu returned. Qiao Ruoliu was pregnant. Jean Lai was worried that she would go shopping alone, so he accompanied her. Today was her birthday and they even bought a cake on the way back. When they saw Jean Kuan enter the door, both of them were shocked. The things in their hands almost fell to the ground. Jean Lai was more mature in the end. He asked Qiao Ruoliu to bring the things into the kitchen, while he confronted Jean Kuan. Jean Kuan wanted him to go back to the Jean family with him, but Jean Lai refused. Jean Kuan used Qiao Ruoliu to threaten him. Jean Lai knew that his father had always been a man of his word, but he never thought that he would have the intention to kill Qiao Ruoliu. In the past, he spent every day training and managing the Jean family's business. Everything he did was carried out according to Jean Kuan's will. After a long time, he almost forgot what he was like. Jean Lai didn't want to live like that. He begged Jean Kuan to let him go. He didn't want to go back to the Jean family. If he had to go back to the Jean family, he had to bring Qiao Ruoliu back as well. Jean Kuan was angered by his son, but he didn't show any expression on his face. He opened his mouth again and asked Jean Lai if he wanted to go back with him. When he got a negative answer, he vented all his anger on Qiao Ruoliu. It was this woman. It was her. It was her who seduced his son. It was her who caused his son to become like this. Jean Kuan didn't expect that the son he had spent so much effort to nurture would one day get out of his control, so he fired a shot at Qiao Ruoliu without thinking. When Jean Hauser saw this scene, his heart was torn apart. But before he could react, Jean Lai had already rushed forward and blocked in front of Qiao Ruoliu. That shot was aimed at the heart. Jean Lai died in the hands of his own father just like that. Jean Kuin didn't expect that his shot would kill his son. His anger turned into shock. But after the shock, it condensed into even greater anger. It was all that B'Tch's fault. It was her. She was the one who caused his son to risk his life for her. Jean Kuin was so angry that he went crazy. When he saw Qiao Ruoliu, who had pounced on Jean Lai and was crying loudly, he felt extremely angry. He held the gun and fired 2 shots, sending Qiao Ruoliu on her way. Qiao Ruoliu fell on Jean Lai's body and died just like that. Jean Hauze was completely dumbfounded. He had even forgotten what he wanted to do and what he could do. He watched as Jean Kuin looked at the 2 corpses in front of him and coldly asked his subordinates to dispose of them. At this moment, Jean Hauze finally reacted. He rushed out of the cupboard and threw himself on his parents. He kept calling their names. But there was no reaction at all. In the end, Jean Hauze rushed up and randomly hit Jean Kuin. But his body was quickly held up by someone. Jean Kuin wanted to eliminate the roots and kill Jean Hauze as well. But before he could kill Jean Hauze, Uncle Chi's phone rang first. In the early years, for the sake of power, Jean Kuin married the daughter of the Liu family in the province where Jean Lai's Qingqing was located. After his wife died, the Liu family took good care of Jean Lai, their grandson. Previously, he hadn't come looking for him because Jean Lai was under the protection of the outer sect. Recently, the Liu family had fallen into some small trouble. Jean Kuin could finally teach Jean Lai a lesson. Who knew that this lesson would cause him to lose his sense of propriety? Jean Lai was dead. Uncle Chi received the news at this moment. Jean Lai's grandfather had actually been re-elected. Although Jean Kuen's power was great, it was impossible for him to disregard the power of the government. Just now he had killed Jean Lai and Qiao Ruoliu on impulse. But now that he had calmed down, he knew that he was in trouble. Jean Lai's grandfather pitied his grandson for losing his mother early, so he valued this grandson very much. Now Jean Lai was dead and he died at his hands. It was time for him to expand his power. If Jean Lai's grandfather went all out to deal with him, it would be quite troublesome. Jean Kuin wasn't afraid of trouble, but he didn't want to stop expanding his business territory. After thinking about it, he decided not to kill Jean Hauze for the time being. At least Jean Hauze couldn't die now. He had someone knock Jean Hauze out and bring him back to Qing City. And then, in order to cover up his actions, he ordered Uncle Chi to deal with Jean Lai and Qiao Ruoliu's bodies. When he got on the plane, Jean Kuin, who was already crazy, looked at the unconscious Jean Hauze and thought of a very crazy plan. He couldn't let anyone know that he had killed Jean Lai. Then the best way was to let Jean Lai still be alive. On this point, Jean Kuin couldn't help but rejoice. Although his illegitimate children couldn't be seen in public, they were of some use at this time. Because one of his illegitimate children looked 70% similar to him. Jean Lai's appearance was very similar to his. That illegitimate child only looked 60% similar to Jean Lai. Jean Kuin asked someone to bring the illegitimate child back to the old house. Then he hired a first-class plastic surgeon to do a microsurgery on the illegitimate child. In the end, a fake Jean Lai was born just like that. Jean Lai's grandfather was already old. He hadn't seen his grandson for a few years, so he naturally missed him. That illegitimate child was already married and had given birth to Jean Li and Jean Yang. Jean Kuin knew all of this. But in the past he didn't care, nor did he value it. Now he began to pretend to value it. He let the fake Jean Lai learn some of Jean Lai's previous behaviors and habits until the two of them were very close. That was why he let him appear in front of Jean Lai's grandfather. Why did he leave Jean Hauze alive? It was his last trump card. If the fake Jean Lai couldn't be fooled, then no matter what, Jean Hauze was still the great-grandson of the Liu family. At crucial times, it was always a protective talisman. If the fake Jean Lai could be fooled, then Jean Hauze would be useless. In fact, according to Jean Kuen's plan, it didn't matter whether Jean Hauze stayed or not. It was Uncle Chi's idea to keep Jean Hauze. He was also one of the people who nurtured Jean Lai. He had watched Jean Lai grow up. At that moment he felt a trace of compassion. He spared Jean Hauze's life. But Jean Hauze knew that his parents had died in Jean Kuen's hands, so how could he let it go so easily? In order to convince Jean Kuin, Uncle Chi made a suggestion. He could hypnotize Jean Hauze and make him forget what had happened in the past. It had to be said that this idea was not bad. Jean Kuin had killed the son he had raised on impulse. Although he didn't regret it, he was still willing to give Jean Hauze a chance. The 9-year-old Jean Hauze was hypnotized. He had forgotten that it was a scene he would pursue for the rest of his life. Not only did he forget, but after he was hypnotized he actually thought that the fake Zhan Li was his father. In order to coax the Liu family, Zhan Li and Zhan Yang were not brought back to the Zhan family's mansion. Zhan Kun decided to nurture a new successor that he liked. That was Zhan Haoze. Didn't you, Zhan Li, not want to go back to the Zhan family? Didn't you not want to take over the Zhan family? I want your son to take over. I want your son to stay in the Zhan family forever. Zhan Haoze, who was hypnotized, always felt that something was wrong. But he was too young and the power of hypnosis was too strong. He couldn't remember. But he instinctively didn't like Zhan Kun very much. Every time he faced him he would be very resistant. Including the fake Zhan Li. He would call him father, but he no longer had the same intimacy as before. He wasn't close to Zhan Li, but he was dismissive towards Zhan Kun. Every time he saw him, his face would be cold. It was fine once or twice, but after a long time, Zhan Kun didn't want to see him anymore. After acting in front of the Liu family and successfully deceiving them. He had also lost his patience with Zhan Haoze, who didn't like him every time he saw him. Although he didn't kill him, he had someone send Zhan Haoze to boarding school. Zhan Haoze stayed in boarding school until junior high school. When he was 14, Zhan Li and Zhan Yang also entered this junior high school. By chance, Zhan Haoze accidentally met the fake Zhan Li, who had sent Zhan Li and Zhan Yang to school. He wanted to go up and call him father. That was his father. Even though he no longer felt close to him, he was still his father. But when he called him father, he was mocked by Zhan Li and Zhan Yang. This is my father, not your father. He went to see Zhan Li. At that time, Zhan Li couldn't speak in the Zhan family. After reprimanding Zhan Li and Zhan Yang, he told Zhan Haoze that he was his father and told him not to listen to Zhan Li and the others' nonsense. If you're my father, then are they also your children? Are they children you had with another woman? In Zhan Haoze's memory, his mother died in an accident, so his father, Zhan Li, brought him back to the Zhan family. But now he was told that Zhan Li had other children? Haoze, they are also my children. They are your younger brothers. The fake Zhan Li in the past wouldn't have been willing to pretend to be Zhan Li. But after he tasted the benefits of pretending to be Zhan Li, he wasn't willing to give up. No, I don't have a younger brother. I don't have a brother. Zhan Haoze refused to accept and ran away. He remembered that he didn't have a brother. He remembered that his parents were very loving. But why was everything different after her mother died? Zhan Haoze returned to the dormitory with a splitting headache. However, under the suppression of the hypnosis, he still couldn't remember. He only felt a headache. But that day, someone in Zhan Haoze's dormitory happened to be celebrating his birthday. The man brought back a birthday cake. Seeing that Zhan Haoze was uncomfortable, she even said that she would treat him to a cake. A cake? Birthday? Those keywords made Zhan Haoze's headache worse. He finally fainted from the pain. Zhan Haoze's roommate hurriedly called the dormitory management and sent him to the hospital. In the hospital, Zhan Haoze remembered everything. He remembered that his mother had died in Zhan Kun's hands, and he also remembered that his father had also died in Zhan Kun's hands. His parents were dead, but he did not avenge them. He even called Zhan Kun grandpa? And he followed Zhan Kun back to the Zhan family? Zhan Haoze could not forgive himself. He could not stay in the Zhan family anymore. Not only could he no longer stay in the Zhan family, but he could no longer stay in Qing City. He was only 14 years old. He wanted revenge. He wanted to kill Zhan Kun to avenge his parents. But he didn't know how a 14-year-old like him could do it. Zhan Kun was a very cautious person. Even when he was sleeping, there were bodyguards outside his door. Not to mention that every time he went out, he was always accompanied by more than a dozen bodyguards. Zhan Haoze wanted such a big battle. He left the hospital and went back to school. He thought for a long time, but in the end he decided to leave first. Just like that, Zhan Haoze left the Zhan family in Qing City. At first he didn't know where to go. Later he decided to return to the city where his mother used to live. Lin City. When Zhan Haoze found his home, he found that the area had been demolished and replanned. The home that he and his parents used to live in could no longer be found. Not only could he not find it, but there wasn't even a trace of it. But even so, Zhan Haoze had never thought of leaving Lin City. This was the place where his parents had lived with him for 9 years. The more painful the later years were, the more blissful those 9 years were. Shi Mingwan was stunned when she heard this. That Zhan Kun, was he crazy? He killed his own son and daughter-in-law, and he didn't even let his own grandson off? Such a person wasn't crazy, but he was probably already crazy, right? After all, if he wasn't crazy, how could he do such a thing? Haoze? Shi Mingwan didn't know what she could do at this time. She couldn't even imagine what she, who had always had a happy family, would do if she encountered such a thing. She squatted down and hugged Jean Hause's shoulder. It had been a long time since the incident happened. Any consolation would be useless at this moment. She could only hug him tightly, hugging him with all her might. Jean Hause looked at the 3 tombstones expressionlessly. His life was divided into 2 stages. Before he was 9 years old, after he was 9 years old. No, it should be said that before he was 9 years old and after he was 14 years old. The few years in the Jean family in between could only be considered a nightmare for him. After he was 14 years old. Every day, every hour, every minute of his life he lived only for revenge. Shi Mingwan looked at the side of his face and thought about everything he had experienced. At this moment, all the confusion and reproach she once had towards Jean Hause disappeared. There was only a faint heartache left. For such a man to watch his own parents die in front of him, how strong must his mentality be to keep him from collapsing? She suddenly understood why Jean Hause always had a cold face and why it was so difficult for him to smile. No one would be able to smile when they encountered such a thing, right? Then what happened after that? Jean Kun, how was he now? Shi Mingwan looked at him with concern. Su Qingsang had heard about the Jean family from Hua Jinyao. Su Qingsang had mentioned it to Shi Mingwan before. Shi Mingwan knew that Jean Hause's father was still alive. But Jean Lai seemed to have a wife. At first, she thought that Jean Lai had married someone else, which was why Jean Hause's relationship with his father was so bad. But she didn't expect that Jean Lai wasn't Jean Hause's father at all. Jean Hause didn't say anything. He stood up. He looked at the tombstone. Dad. Mom. I've avenged you. There was only one sentence, a simple sentence. But Shi Mingwan could understand what he meant. Your grandfather, that person, how is he? That kind of person wasn't worthy of being a grandfather. Although Grandma Shi was a little unruly, she was only a little feudal. But what was Jean Kun? In the hospital. When he came, Tang Hua had asked about it. Jean Kun was sent in for resuscitation again. He had been struck by a stroke twice and had suffered such a huge shock. He probably wouldn't live for a few days. Jean Hause's voice was a little cold. He held Shi Mingwan's hand tightly. I once thought about killing him myself. Shi Mingwan wasn't surprised. Anyone who encountered such a thing would have such thoughts, right? Chapter 7:10. The mountain breeze was slightly cold. Shi Mingwan looked at him. She had some guesses in her heart, but she wasn't sure. Jean Hause turned to look at her and said softly, because I met you. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. When she met the gentleness in his eyes, her heart trembled. Dear brother? Yes. Jean Hause smiled. That smile was very light. It overlapped with Qiao Zhe when he was young. At that time he only wanted revenge. When he came to Lin City, he had nothing on him and couldn't do anything to Jean Kun. Although he wanted revenge, he couldn't find a way. What was even worse was that after Jean Kun found out that he had run away, he sent people to hunt him down several times. If it weren't for his good luck and the fact that Jean Kun was focused on expanding his business during that period of time, he wouldn't have been able to focus on dealing with him. Otherwise it was unknown whether he would have survived. There were naturally other reasons for this. Jean Lai had come to Lin City and stayed for many years, so he naturally didn't stay for nothing. Although he looked like an ordinary employee, he came from the Jean family after all. He had left someone in Lin City. Those people eventually became Jean Hause's help. After coming to Lin City, Jean Hause changed his name. He followed his biological mother's surname, Qiao Zhe. He lived in seclusion in a bungalow and rarely interacted with others. Not only to be inconspicuous, but most importantly, he didn't want Jean Kun to say that he borrowed the Jean family's power in the end. Even if it was someone left behind by Jean Lai, it was still a member of the Jean family. His surname was Qiao, so it had nothing to do with the Jean family. He was only 14 years old and could do too little. However, this didn't stop the flames of revenge in his heart from burning. He stayed in a bungalow. This area was complicated and chaotic. Although he was only 14 years old, he had already seen the darkness of the Jean family. In terms of methods, these hooligans wouldn't be more powerful than Jean Kun. In terms of ruthlessness, Jean Hause, who wanted revenge wholeheartedly, was like Satan from hell. No one could stop him. After he used force to subdue a few hooligans, he began to expand his territory step by step. The time he met Shi Mingwan was a mistake. He was too impatient and accidentally offended a small local leader called Brother Liang. Behind Brother Liang was a slightly famous and powerful leader in Lin City called Big Boss Hui. Brother Liang had lost face at his place. He had spent the entire night picking more than 10 people to get back at him. That day he was careless and let his subordinates go back first. At that time he had already been in Lin City for a year. During this year he relied on his fierce fighting skills to improve a lot. The young man felt that his skills were not bad, so he did not take this group of people seriously. However, in the end, it was impossible for him to not lose when fighting against more than 10 people alone. Just when he thought he was going to die, Shi Mengwan appeared. She was actually very timid and didn't dare to do anything else. She only shouted that the police were here and saved him. However, this person was quite smart and knew to make some noise. Brother Liang's men had left. His entire body was in extreme pain from being beaten up, but he knew that someone had saved him. He walked around the alley and walked in front of Shi Mengwan. Only then did he realize that the little girl was so scared that she fell to the ground. She was clearly so scared that her face was pale, but she forced herself to calm down and did not run away. For some strange reason he took the bread from her bag and ate it. He was pretending to be hungry, but he really wanted to use this opportunity to teach her a lesson. Who would have thought that a timid little girl would dare to lecture him and say that he littered? How ridiculous. Who would care about where the trash was thrown in that area? What was even more unexpected was that not only did the girl dare to lecture him, but she also dared to follow him home. The days that followed were a little out of his imagination. Not only was she bold, but she was also stupid. She gave him all the money she had. He thought that he was going to take her in, but he didn't expect her to run away the next day. She was really stupid. If it weren't for him, she would have been taken away by someone else. If 1 or 2 people went missing in this area, there would be no sound at all. After that, it was much simpler. She treated him as her savior and called him dear brother. He didn't care. It was just one more person to eat. As long as she didn't mind, he didn't care. However, after having her, his life was indeed much better. At least he didn't have to eat irregular meals and he didn't have to stop for meals. After that, things got out of his control. That year, during the Lantern Festival, that bowl of alcoholic rice balls. He looked at her blushing face under the light and suddenly couldn't control the impulse in his heart. The young kiss, the intimacy of hugging each other to sleep every day. At that time he was already 15 years old and had been on the streets for so long. He knew almost everything he needed to know. He knew in his heart that he had high hopes for the girl. He didn't think that this was something that couldn't be said. However, in the current situation he couldn't do anything. His plan was slowly unfolding, and the number of subordinates he subdued was also increasing. But it wasn't enough. He still had a grudge to take. Moreover, she was too young. She didn't even have her period. She was really too young. Even if he could wait for her to grow up. To him, she couldn't just stay by his side like this. After all, he still had a grudge to take and she should live a normal life, not be like him, a hooligan on the streets. Therefore, he thought of a way to find a former colleague of Qiao Ruoliu, who had a good relationship with Qiao Ruoliu. Then he arranged for her to go to school. In his eyes, his relationship with Shi Mengwan was getting better and better. He could feel the starlight in the girl's eyes when she looked at him. He could also feel the closeness the girl had to him every night. She would fall asleep in his arms. She would cook every day and wait for him to come home. Under the light, she did her homework very seriously and attentively. He could tell that she liked school very much. Even though she had dropped a lot of homework, there was a smile on her face. She obviously liked school. Not only was she good at her studies, but because she could go to school, she took care of him even more attentively. Other than cooking, she actually knew how to change clothes. For a period of time, he even felt that other than being too young, they were no different from husband and wife at other times. Later, he looked at her in high spirits and said that she wanted to be a fashion designer when she grew up. At that time, Shi Mengwan's eyes lit up. That was good. She did what she liked and he did what he wanted to do. He let her go to school and worked hard to help her realize her dream. And his methods outside became more and more ruthless because he wanted to make himself stronger as quickly as possible. Everything went very smoothly. He thought that when his power grew stronger, when he took his revenge, Shi Mengwan would also grow up. Shi Mengwan had also grown up. At that time they could really be together. What he didn't expect was that his rapid rise would provoke the big shot, Hui. He got someone to deal with him. That day Shi Mengwan said very happily that she wanted to go play. He knew about Mount Qing. He had been there before when he was young with his parents. To him, those memories had already become a wound that he didn't want to touch. But looking at Shi Mengwan's smiling face, he couldn't refuse. They went to Mount Qing, climbed the mountain and played. Everything was beautiful. She was happy and so was he. He thought that this kind of happiness would last forever. However, when they went down the mountain they met the big shots people. It wasn't just the big shots people. The people who came later were Zhang Kuan's people. When he was beaten to the ground and couldn't get up, he saw Shi Mengwan get kicked and her body flew out. At that moment, his heart was broken. He was beaten to the point that he didn't have the strength to fight back, not to mention that the other party had a weapon in his hand. And he was only one person. The moment he lost consciousness, he thought that he was dead for sure. His only regret was that this kind of life was indeed a dream. Not only could he not live a peaceful life, but he also implicated Shi Mengwan. If it was possible, he would definitely let her go back and live a peaceful and normal life. However, Zhang Haoze didn't expect that when he opened his eyes again, not only was he not dead, but he was also saved by someone. The person who saved him was Qin Feifei. Qin Feifei happened to see his face at that time. As a young girl, she was obsessed with looks and liked handsome people. At that time, Shi Mengwan fell behind the tree. Qin Feifei didn't see her at first glance. She only saw Zhang Haoze. She brought Zhang Haoze home. After Zhang Haoze woke up, he knew that he had been saved by Qin Feifei. And he also figured out the situation in the shortest time possible. Qin Yongchang's company could be considered to be of a large scale in Lin City. Although it couldn't compare to the Su family and the Li family, it still had some power. Especially since Qin Yongchang's maternal family was in the province. It didn't take him long to realize that this was an excellent shelter. Especially when Qin Feifei, who was still young, had an extraordinary liking for him. With the Qin family's power, he went to school, started a business and developed his own power. Of course, he also gave the Qin family some feedback. This could be considered as taking what they needed. As for Shi Mengwan, she was suppressed in the corner of his memory and was no longer mentioned. Before he succeeded, before he had the ability, the further away he was from her, the safer it would be for her. What if Shi Mengwan was with another man? He thought that this was also good. There was nothing bad about it. At least, it was safer and happier than being by his side. After all, the more he grew up, the more he understood what kind of giant the Zhan family was. With his current ability, he couldn't touch the Zhan family at all. He could only plan slowly. Take your time. Moreover, he was prepared. If he really couldn't do it, he would perish together with Zhang Kuan. No matter what, he had to take revenge for his parents and sister. But he really didn't expect that he would meet Shi Mengwan. In the hospital, she looked at him and called him dear brother with such a surprised look in her eyes. At that moment, he could feel the impulse in his heart. It was a kind of breathtaking. He looked at Shi Mengwan and had a feeling that it was as expected. She had grown up and was so beautiful that it couldn't be compared. He had once imagined what that bright and smiling girl would look like when she grew up. He had imagined that she would be very beautiful when she grew up. But he didn't expect her to be even more beautiful than he had imagined. Seeing her call him dear brother with a face full of surprise, seeing her pounce over to acknowledge him with a face full of surprise, he almost agreed. But it was only almost. Those emotions were perfectly restrained by him. His path was a lonely one. He didn't need friends, nor did he need love. If he could resist not looking for Shi Mengwan for more than 10 years, he could force himself not to see her and not acknowledge her in the future. But time and time again they met again and again, causing his heart to become more and more out of control. He tried hard to push her away, but she tried hard to make him admit his identity. Until that time when he was drugged and lost control for a moment. No, it couldn't be considered to be out of control. He instinctively hoped that if he had to have a woman, that woman was Shi Mengwan. But this wouldn't do. From time to time, the people arranged by Qingqing would die in Zhang Kuan's hands. Zhang Kuan was careful when he did things and never left any traces. Uncle Qi had followed him for decades, so there was no need to elaborate on his loyalty to him. If he hadn't borrowed the Qin family's power, it wouldn't have been as simple as just receiving a lesson. He was sometimes cold and sometimes warm towards Shi Mengwan, and he was sometimes distant. The impulse in his youth, the amazement after Shi Mengwan grew up. He wanted to push her away, but he was reluctant. He wanted to get closer, but he was afraid that it would make her feel unsafe. Qingqing's progress was considered smooth, but it was only on the surface. The Zhan family was too big, and with Zhang Kuan's support over the years, Zhan Lai's brothers as well as his grandchildren, all had their own thoughts. The situation in the Zhan family was very chaotic, but because of Zhang Kuan's strength, it was firmly under control. He could only tear open the Zhan family bit by bit. During this process, all the coldness and neglect that Shi Mengwan felt from him were because he had no choice but to do it. He knew how much pain Shi Mengwan was in, but he couldn't say it. He couldn't say anything. When he had nothing, Shi Mengwan was willing to suffer with him. In such a dangerous situation, Shi Mengwan probably wanted to stay by his side even more. But he couldn't. He would rather stay away from her. He even seemed to be engaged to Qin Feifei. But he didn't expect that he had overestimated his self-control. When Xiao Qi, Wan Xianyang and other men appeared by Shi Mingwan's side, he still couldn't restrain himself. He wanted to trap her by his side and make her belong to him completely from body to heart. He was a selfish man. If he didn't see Shi Mingwan, if he didn't see her, then he could really let her marry someone else and be with other men. But he couldn't. If he didn't get it, then it didn't matter if he lost it. But after getting it and then losing it, he found that he couldn't accept it. He could only destroy her with other men time and time again. He trapped her by his side time and time again, reminding her that she belonged to him. On the surface he was very successful. But he knew that she wasn't happy. If he wanted her to be happy, he had to stop taking revenge. This was even more difficult for him. In a dilemma, he sped up his actions, but he discovered a new difficulty. He wanted Zhang Kuan's life, but he didn't want to put himself in danger anymore. Because of Shi Mingwan, he still wanted to be with her, spend the rest of his life together, form a family together, and perhaps have 1 or 2 more children. So he hesitated. When Uncle Qi came looking for him, he decided to follow his plan. He wanted to get the Zhan family and make Zhang Kuan pay the price. As for him, he didn't want to get a single cent of the Zhan family. 1. Zhan Hauze wrapped his arms around Shi Mingwan's waist and held her in his arms. "I'm sorry." He didn't acknowledge her when she recognized him, and he didn't make it clear to her immediately. This was his pride, but it was also his selfishness. The tip of Shi Mingwan's nose was a little sore, and her eyes were swollen. She buried her face in his chest. She had received too much news today and she didn't know how to react. She had always known that he was her dear brother, but she had never thought that one day he would admit it himself. "I thought you would never admit it in your life. I'm sorry." Other than these 3 words, Zhan Hauze didn't know what else he could say. Shi Mingwan shook her head. How proud was he? She knew it before. Seeing that he never told her anything outside, she could roughly understand that in his heart, he always liked to put her in the position of a protector. "I should have told you earlier." Shi Mingwan didn't care about what he said. Instead, what she cared about was another thing. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "You said that if I didn't recognize you, you wouldn't have come to look for me?" "Yes." "Even if I was with another man? Even if I got married and had children?" Zhan Hauze's expression was a little subtle for a moment, but he still nodded. "Yes." Shi Mingwan's eyes were even redder than before. "Do you know that if you really did that, it would be the greatest cruelty to me?" 1. He knew, but he also believed that even if that was the case, she would live a good life. "I've been looking for you for more than 10 years. But they all said that there's no such person as Qiao Zhe." She wrapped her arms around his waist tightly as if seeking some comfort. "I don't believe it and I refuse to give up. Do you know why people from Song Seeking Studio are called Song Seeking? It's because I want to find you, my dear brother. Dear brother, ever since I saw you that year and was saved by you in my heart, there's only one person I want to be with, and it's only you." Zhan Hauze looked at the sincerity in her eyes and reached out to wipe away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. "I know. If you know, why didn't you come to look for me? I want you to be happy. Without you, my happiness would be discounted." She had family, friends, and her own career. She could also live a good life, but her happiness would be missing a piece. That piece was something only he could give her. "Who asked you to take away my first kiss? Who asked you to appear in my life? So, you have to take responsibility." "Okay." Zhan Hauze nodded. "I'll be responsible for your life from now on." Shi Mingwan smiled. She buried her face in his chest and gently rubbed against it. "Dear brother." "Yes." "Dear brother." "Yes." "Dear brother." Shi Mingwan had a surreal feeling which made her keep calling him dear brother. Zhan Hauze couldn't help but lower his head and give her a deep kiss. Shi Mingwan took the initiative to cater to him, but not long after she reacted. She took a step back and looked at the tombstone beside her, a little embarrassed. "It's okay. Mom and Dad will like you." As if he knew what she was thinking, Zhan Hauze's voice was a little teasing. This was the first time she had seen Zhan Hauze so relaxed and casual. She bit her lip, a little nervous. "Has your trouble been resolved?" "It's all resolved. Once Zhan Kuan died, the fall of the Zhan family was inevitable. Of course, before the fall of the Zhan family, he had already broken the Zhan family's business into parts, and then reorganized it. In those few months he only slept 3 hours a day. After his operations, the current Zhan family was already a brand new Zhan family without Zhan Kuan. All of Zhan Kuan's Zhan family no longer existed. The new Zhan family was formed by him, a brand new business kingdom. Shi Mingwan nodded. Dear brother, we'll be together forever, right? Yes. That's great. Shi Mingwan hugged Zhan Haoze again. I'll call you dear brother from now on, okay? Okay. Dear brother. Yes. Dear brother. Yes. I love you. Me too. Dear brother. Shi Mingwan suddenly raised her head and looked at him with a focused expression. What my mother said last time was a lie to you. My mother won't want me to get a son-in-law. I know. Father Shi had already said that Shi Mingwan didn't need to make any sacrifices. It didn't matter who she married as long as she was happy. You have a very good pair of parents. You too. Shi Mingwan gripped his hand tightly and looked at the 3 tombstones. Dear brother. Dear brother, believe me, your parents must want you to live well. Not for him to take revenge. Although he had already succeeded. But he believed that all parents in this world only wanted their children to grow up safely. Yes. I know. Zhan Haoze held her hand tightly. Let's go. Let's go down the mountain. He turned around and looked at the tombstones. Finally, he bowed, and when he raised his head again, there was a faint smile on his face. It was bright and sunny, completely different from the gloomy atmosphere of the past. Dad, Mom, don't worry. I'll live well. For myself, for you, and for Wanwan. Then goodbye, Auntie and Uncle. Shi Mingwan also bowed, but the way she addressed him attracted Zhan Haoze's objection. You should call them Mom and Dad too. Shi Mingwan blinked as if she was a little embarrassed. In the end, she readily accepted his advice. Dad, Mom, Sister, goodbye. I'll come to see you with Haoze next time. Zhan Haoze smiled, held Shi Mingwan's hand, and left together. Wanwan. When they went down the mountain, Zhan Haoze suddenly called Shi Mingwan's name. Yes. I founded XM Company in Lin City. XM is just an abbreviation, but the Chinese meaning is to dream. I miss Mingwan. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. She turned around and looked at him. There was a flash of surprise in her eyes. Dear brother? Thank you. Wanwan. Zhan Haoze stopped and looked at her. Thank you for waiting for me. Without her, he could still continue to take revenge. He could continue to live his own life. But at the same time, his happiness would also be discounted. Without Shi Mingwan, his life wouldn't be as perfect as it was now. However, Zhan Haoze didn't expect that it could be even more perfect than it was now. His wedding with Shi Mingwan was scheduled for October. They separated in October, so they chose to get married in October. After the wedding, they were supposed to go on a honeymoon, but unexpectedly. As soon as the wedding ended, Shi Mingwan vomited profusely. The nervous Zhan Haoze called the doctor to check Shi Mingwan's body, only to find out that she was already more than 2 months pregnant. Because she had been busy with the wedding and the studio, she didn't even know. Because of the severe morning sickness, Zhan Haoze and she naturally couldn't go on a honeymoon. 7 months later, Shi Mingwan gave birth to a very cute baby girl. Zhan Haoze wanted a daughter wholeheartedly, and now his wish was finally fulfilled. He thought to himself that his life was truly perfect now. Chapter 7:11. When Li Qianxue entered the room, there were already several people sitting inside. Speaking of which, they had all worked with the Li Corporation before. Sitting at the head of the table was her ex-in-law, Qiu Yanba's father, Qiu Tonghe. They were all familiar faces: the Zheng family, the Song family, the Wu family, and the Chang family. Li Qianxue nodded at a few people and greeted them one by one. Then she sat down in a seat near the head of the table. Today was a private banquet. No matter what, Qiu Tonghe was once his in-laws. Although the two of them weren't going to get married, they didn't want to become enemies. There was still a connection. Qianxue. Qiu Tonghe had a good relationship with Li Qianxue. In the past, they used to call each other in-laws. Now, there was nothing wrong with calling each other by name. He asked Li Qianxue to sit down and poured her a cup of tea. Li Qianxue had been socializing a lot in the past 6 months, but everyone knew the rules. She usually didn't drink outside. Brother Qiu, if you have something to say, just say it. There's no need to be so polite. Even if she doesn't give face to Qiu Tonghe, she still has to give face to old Master Qiu. Then I'll be straightforward. What Qiu Tonghe wanted to talk about today had something to do with Hu Jinyao. Earlier, Madame Luo and Madame Song had teamed up with Su Peixian and accidentally injured Xiang Kaiping. At that time, no one knew that Xiang Kaiping was Su Qingsang's biological mother. Hu Jinyao didn't direct his anger at the Su family, but at the Luo family and the Song family. There was no need to mention the Luo family. The Star Luo department store had been acquired by the Tianyu Group. Now it was simply miserable. The Song family's Kisong Electronics was even more humiliated by He Jinyao. Look, it's been so long. Recently, Brother Luo has found some new connections, but your son-in-law is too powerful. They don't dare to give him the list. Qianxue. No matter what, they were family friends. Don't push things too far, don't you think? Cho Tonghe didn't want to get involved in these things, but the Luo family and the Song family begged the Cho family. Now, only the Cho clan had some face in front of the Li clan. He had to give it to her. Li Qianxue knew about these things. When she came in and saw the Luo family and the Song family, she roughly guessed the other party's intentions. I can't make the decision on this matter. Qianxue, that's not appropriate. Your president was mother-in-law. He has to listen to you, right? Not to mention the fact that He Jinyao isn't in Lin City right now. Even if he was, he might not listen to me. At the very least, shouldn't you be looking for He Jinyao now? Look, you said it yourself. President He isn't in Lin City. We can't find him even if we want to. Moreover, President He is still standing up for your daughter, isn't he? But Mrs. Luo and Mrs. Song did it for your other daughter. Li Qianxue's expression did not look too good. Of course she knew that. Speaking of which, Su Peijian was the one who started this. But what of it? Speaking of which, if it weren't for Mrs. Luo and Mrs. Song, Su Qingsang wouldn't have felt guilty towards Xiang Kaiping. In the end, she even almost refused to acknowledge her as her mother and called Xiang Kaiping her mother instead. Thinking of this, Li Qianxue felt uncomfortable and naturally didn't want to get involved in this matter. Qianxue, it's all in the past. Mrs. Luo and Mrs. Song also know that they were wrong. Besides, this has nothing to do with old Luo and old Song. Why don't you ask your son-in-law to be merciful and let them go? Mr. Luo and Mr. Song, who were called out, began to smile apologetically. Li Qianxue felt bored. She couldn't eat at all in such a situation. She looked at the two of them. Okay. I'll tell He Jinyao not to deal with you in the future. However, if you do anything to provoke He Jinyao in the future, it's none of my business. Of course, of course. How can I? I won't do anything stupid again. The two of them promised together. The matter was finally resolved. Cho Tonghe wanted to ask someone to serve the dishes, but Li Qianxue couldn't eat anymore. She got up and left the hotel. She didn't want to go home. Li Qianxue sat in the car. The driver in front, Xiao Zhao, asked twice where she was going. In the end, she told him the name of a bar. It wasn't that she couldn't go home to drink, but it wouldn't be good if old Master Li saw her like this. Su Qingsang followed He Jinyao to Rong City. Su Yusen had already gone to school after getting into college. There were only her and old Master Li at home. It was fine during the day. Li Qianxue could focus all her energy on work. But at night she couldn't. As soon as she returned home, she couldn't help but think of some things in the past. Her sweet daughter, her obedient son. Although Su Qinghui didn't love her, he would come home every day. At that time the family wasn't happy, but at least it wouldn't be as lonely as it was now. After entering the bar, Xiao Zhao couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. Li Qianxue just wanted to have a drink or two. At her age, what could she do? Wait for me. Come in and pick me up later. If it weren't for Xiao Zhao, she wouldn't have dared to go into a bar alone to drink. Beautiful women always attracted people's attention, even if this woman didn't look young. For Li Qianxue, age had added a different kind of sexiness to her. She ordered a glass of Bloody Mary and sat on the edge of the bar, drinking. Li Qianxue was born in a big family and had been carefully trained by old Master Li since she was a child. Her temperament really didn't fit in with the people around her. But it was this incompatibility that attracted the attention of many people. Before she finished a glass of wine, someone had already come over to strike up a conversation. Miss, can we have a drink together? No. Li Qianxue didn't even look back. She wasn't interested in knowing who the person was. Don't be so petty. How boring is it to drink alone? It's more interesting to drink together. As the man spoke, he reached out his hand to Li Qianxue. Before Li Qianxue could knock the man's hand away, another hand was faster than her. Su Qinghui gently twisted the man's hand. He stood there, and his usually elegant face actually had a hint of fierceness at this moment. You, get lost. Su Qinghui's voice was very cold. The man withdrew his hand and took a step back. He wanted to leave like this, but he felt embarrassed, so he could only leave after saying some harsh words. Just you wait. Su Qinghui ignored the man's harsh words and turned to look at Li Qianxue. She had already finished the wine in her glass and ordered a second glass. When she picked up the glass, he blocked her movement. Qianxue, stop drinking. Who are you? Li Qianxue looked at Su Qinghui and raised her eyebrows slightly. The last time the two of them met was when she went to Rong City to visit Su Qingsang. It had been more than a month since then. After returning to Lin City, they were both in the mall. They would meet frequently. However, Li Qianxue had the ability to make herself ignore Su Qinghui. She had met him a few times when she came back, but every time she completely ignored Su Qinghui. Su Qinghui knew how much she hated him. He felt helpless, but he couldn't let her keep drinking here. Qianxue, be obedient. If you want to drink, go back and drink. Li Qianxue's alcohol tolerance was not bad. A glass of wine was nothing to her. She looked at Su Qinghui's hand on her wrist, raised her hand and easily waved it away. Be obedient? Who are you? Why should I listen to you? This was the second time she had said this. A flash of bitterness appeared in Su Qinghui's eyes. Qianxue, I don't think Dad would want you to do this, right? He didn't know what had happened to make Li Qianxue come out to drink, but he believed that old Master Li would definitely not agree. Who are you calling Dad? Su Qinghui, that's no longer your father. She was a little annoyed. The person she didn't want to see the most just now was Su Qinghui. If it weren't for his selfishness, the Li family wouldn't have had so many troubles later on. Thinking of this, she couldn't stay any longer. She withdrew her hand and stood up. Su Qinghui followed behind her. Qianxue, I'll send you back. No need. Li Qianxue stopped. Who said I'm going back? I'm just going to the bathroom. Qianxue. Su Qinghui didn't believe that Li Qianxue would be a person who would throw a tantrum. However, her actions in front of him really made him feel that she was throwing a tantrum with him. Su Qinghui, have you had enough? Li Qianxue looked at the worry on his face. She didn't feel touched. She only felt that it was hypocritical. What? Are you worried about me now? Yes. Su Qinghui nodded. It's not safe for a woman to drink outside alone. Who said I'm alone? Xiao Zhao is outside. Li Qianxue's face was a little red because of the alcohol. She wasn't drunk. She knew that. She stood up straight and looked at Su Qinghui with a flash of mockery on her face. Also, you really don't have to worry about me. Let's not talk about the fact that I'm just your ex-wife. We're already divorced and have nothing to do with each other. To me, the person who hurts me the most in this world is you. If you're really worried about me, then don't appear in front of me. Otherwise, every time I see you, I'll feel uncomfortable. Su Qinghui's expression didn't look good. His eyes flashed with pain again. Qianxue, stop. Don't call me. I'm disgusted. Li Qianxue wasn't in the mood to continue drinking, and she didn't plan to stay any longer. Su Qinghui, I'll have to trouble you to put away the damn hypocrisy, guilt, and pain on your face. Because the person who should be in pain should be me, not you. Su Qinghui was stabbed by her words again. For a moment, his body couldn't help but tilt. Qianxue, yes, stop. Li Qianxue really didn't want to hear that sentence. Don't say those 3 words. It's too degrading. Su Qinghui, what you've done makes me want to stab you 1,000,000 times. Don't say those 3 words in front of me. Really, when I hear them, I feel even more disgusted. Qianxue, do we have to be like this? No matter what, they had a child together and so many marriages. Was there really nothing good in her heart that she could miss and think about? No. Li Qianxue shook her head. If you don't appear in front of me, you won't have to do this, right? Su Qinghui stood still. From the time of the divorce until now, he actually knew what kind of person Li Qianxue was. He also knew that it was difficult for him to ask for her forgiveness, but every time he had to endure her words and attitude, it still made him feel pain. In the past, he was the one who made her suffer. Now it was the other way around. It was she who made him suffer. However, he would rather be mocked by her words than see her. Li Qianxue ignored him. She couldn't stay where Su Qinghui was. She couldn't stay for even a minute. After leaving the bar, Xiao Zhao was still waiting. Li Qianxue was about to get into the car when Su Qinghui came over again. Qianxue? Li Qianxue looked at his hand that was holding hers. If you don't let go, do you believe that I'll chop off your hand? Su Qinghui retracted his hand and took a step back because of her attitude. Qianxue, I came to see you today because I have something to tell you. What else can I have to say to you? Li Qianxue blinked. She was really curious. She thought that she and Su Qinghui had nothing to say to each other. Last time I saw Mayor Li, I think you should be more cautious about the Li Corporation's latest project. I heard that there has been a change in the plan. Li Qianxue paused for a moment. She knew about that project. It was one of the plans that she carried out independently after the Li Corporation stabilized in her hands. Had there been a change in the plan? She hadn't heard about it yet, but looking at Su Qinghui, she didn't like his current attitude. She suddenly approached Su Qinghui. Are you trying to curry favor with me? Qianxue, do you have to think that everything I do has a purpose and is so unbearable? Do you need me to think about how unbearable you are? Li Qianxue sneered. Don't you know how unbearable you are? Su Qinghui's expression didn't look good. Li Qianxue took a step back and retreated to the side of the car door. Su Qinghui, you don't get up early without benefits. Everything you do has a purpose. Don't think that I will appreciate your kindness just because you are trying to curry favor with me. Don't forget. Wu Jingyao is my son-in-law, and Mayor Li has a good relationship with him. If anything happens, Mayor Li will definitely inform me and only you. Qianxue, I really don't mean anything else. I just want to remind you. I thank you. Li Qianxue nodded, but in fact she didn't appreciate it at all. The Li Corporation has nothing to do with you now. I have nothing to do with you anymore. So I don't need your reminder. I won't thank you either. She opened the car door. Before getting into the car, she glanced at Su Qinghui again. Based on what you have done, no matter what you do, I will never forgive you, so you can give up. I will never forgive you in this life. Please don't appear in front of me next time. That way I can thank you for letting me have peace. After saying this, Li Qianxue got into the car without hesitation. Xiao Zhao sat in the front seat. When Li Qianxue saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, she glanced at him coldly. This is the last time. If there is a next time, you don't have to work in the Li family anymore. Xiao Zhao shrank his neck. At that moment he was actually shocked by Li Qianxue's gaze. Madam, you can't blame me. Sir. No, what did President Su say? If you think Su Qinghui is better, you can help him drive. I don't mind. Xiao Zhao completely stopped talking. Li Qianxue didn't want to pay any more attention to him. She closed her eyes to rest. Thinking of what Su Qinghui had said just now, she was inexplicably even more annoyed. Ridiculous. Did he really think that she would forgive him? Dream on. Li Qianxue handed the document in her hand to her secretary Yang Rong, and gestured for her to leave first. Then she looked at Wei Ting, who had been sitting opposite her for a long time. Wei Ting, your current actions have already interfered with me. How could that be? I think you're ignoring me. Wei Ting looked at Li Qianxue and spoke with a hint of grievance. Li Qianxue resisted the urge to hold her forehead. She picked up the photo frame on the desk and faced Wei Ting. Do you see this? This is my grandson, my granddaughter. I'm already a grandmother, so you can stop wasting your time on me. It was a group photo. She, Old Master Li, Su Qingsang, Su Yusin, and their 2 children. The photo was taken last month when Su Qingsang's twins were 1 month old. She and Su Qingsang sat on both sides of Old Master Li, each holding a child. Su Yusin stood behind them. Li Qianxue liked this photo very much. To her, this was a real family photo. So she came back and had it washed and placed on the desk. So what? Wei Ting glanced at the photo and pointed at Li Qianxue. With you like this, even if you say you're their mother, people will believe you. Li Qianxue couldn't help but hold her forehead this time. She looked at Wei Ting. President Wei, I really still have business to deal with. Can you please leave first? But you haven't promised me to have dinner with me tonight. Wei Ting looked even more wronged. Today is my birthday. Are you that heartless? First, your birthday has nothing to do with me. Second, you also said that it was your birthday last week. Third, I really have something to do today. I have a social engagement tonight, so I refuse. First, I'm pursuing you. I want you to be my girlfriend, so my birthday has something to do with you. Second, I was on the Gregorian calendar last week. Today is the lunar calendar. Can't I? Third, if you want to go to a social engagement, I can accompany you. After all, how inconvenient is it for a woman to go to a social engagement alone? President Wei. Li Qianxue wasn't a sloppy person. The situation in front of her gave her a headache. If you insist on not leaving, I can only call the security guards to chase you away. Qianxue, you don't have to be so cruel to me, do you? I'm just a young man who admires you. Li Qianxue was so angry that she laughed. Yes, I'm already a grandmother and you're still a young man. So it's impossible between us. Don't say that. People abroad are still together when they're in their 20s. You're only a dozen years older than me. I can accept it. But I can't. Li Qianxue was serious. I can't accept a relationship between an older woman and a younger man. Even if he's older than me by a day or an hour, I can't. Rules are dead, people are alive. Wei Ting was still trying to convince Li Qianxue. Li Qianxue was annoyed. She closed the document in her hand and looked at Wei Ting seriously. Last week, I met your mother by chance, President Wei. President Wei, if you stay here any longer, I don't mind asking your mother to come and take you away. Qianxue. Wei Ting's face fell. You don't have to be so heartless, do you? He was about to pretend to be pitiful when Li Qianshue's internal line rang. Li Qianxue didn't want to pay attention to him and pressed the answer button. Yang Rong said that Su Qinghui was here. I won't see him. They had just met yesterday. Why was he here today? Li Qianxue was inexplicably annoyed. Chapter 7:12. Li Qianxue looked at Wei Ting. She could tell at a glance what he was thinking. There's no need. You don't need to worry about me and him. If you have nothing else to do, please go ahead. Tiske Qianxue, you're not planning to give that heartless man a chance, are you? If that was the case, Wei Ting would really vomit to death. Su Qinghui was an old man. Even if he looked younger than his peers, how could he be as young and strong as him? Apart from anything else, he was more handsome than Su Qinghui, wasn't he? Wei Ting thought immodestly. What does that have to do with you? Li Qianxue looked at Wei Ting. She had a headache dealing with such a suitor who was more than 10 years younger than her and didn't know how to read people's eyes and didn't know how to retreat. Don't cause trouble here. Let's go. Qianxue. Wei Ting wasn't a thin-skinned person. He placed half of his body on the table and looked at Li Qianxue with bright eyes. Good sister, just give me a chance. Look, don't you not like him and don't want to give him a chance? Isn't it better to use me to anger him? Wei Ting, are you too bored? It was the first time Li Qianxue had met such a slippery person. She didn't even know where to start. Do I need you to piss him off? You can't say that. With me it'll be twice the result with half the effort. As Wei Ting spoke, he turned around to open the door. Li Qianxue had no time to stop them. Su Qinghui and Yang Rong appeared in front of her. Su Qinghui really had something to talk to Li Qianxue about today, but she didn't expect to see Wei Ting in Li Qianshue's office. Li Qianshue's suitor was a younger and more energetic man than him. His expression turned slightly ugly for a moment. He knew that he had no place in Li Qianshue's heart. Now he refused to give up and stubbornly wanted to make a last struggle. He really knew his feelings. But even if he knew, he also knew that all of his martial arts were very difficult. For example, he had been working hard for the past year. However, no matter how hard he tried, Li Qianshue's heart was as hard as a knife. She refused to give him a chance. But Wei Ting was different. He was young and energetic. She didn't seem to mind that Li Qianxue was married and was even a grandmother. In this way, Su Qinghui had a strong sense of crisis. Even if he knew that even without Wei Ting, Li Qianxue might not forgive him. However, with such a person around, the difficulty would undoubtedly increase. Xiao Li Xiao Su said he has something too. Yang Rong stood at the back. In this situation, he didn't know if he should stop it or how he should stop it. You can go out first. After Li Qianxue finished speaking, she looked at Wei Ting again. However, he did not respond. Instead, he walked in front of Su Qinghui. Tsk, I say, aren't you guys divorced? How could he be so shameless? Can't you tell that Qianxue doesn't want to see you? Su Qinghui was getting older. Although he was not as angular as Wei Ting, he definitely did not lose in terms of aura. Well, if she doesn't want to see me, does she want to see you? Wei Ting choked. He almost choked on his own saliva. Su Qinghui, you, am I wrong? Without saying anything more, just these 4 words were enough to make Wei Ting flustered and exasperated. He couldn't help but turn around to look at Li Qianxue, wanting her to stand up for him. Li Qianxue had a headache. How could she have the time to pay attention to him? Stop fooling around. Wei Ting wasn't really a child. Being looked at by Li Qianxue like she was looking at a child, he didn't feel good. He looked at Li Qianxue with a belly full of grievance. In fact, he wasn't young anymore. He was in his 30s, but Li Qianxue was older than him. Inexplicably, he felt like an elder. Seeing him like this, she couldn't bear to see him like this. Forget it, you can go back first. I'll look for you next time, okay? When Wei Ting heard this, his eyes immediately lit up. You said that? Then let's have dinner together tonight? No, I have a social engagement tonight. Let's do it tomorrow. Wei Ting nodded, unable to hide the joy on his face. Okay, you said it. I'll pick you up tomorrow. After saying this, he looked at Su Qinghui as if he had won the battle and then left. Yang Rong stood at the door and closed it after he left. He thought to himself that the boss's charm was really not small. Not only did it make her ex-husband reluctant to let go, but even this new rich boss of Lin City, President Wei, couldn't forget about him. Su Qinghui's expression didn't look good. Especially when Wei Ting left, his provocative gaze made him even more uncomfortable. And Li Qianxue actually agreed to go on a date with Wei Ting. Although he couldn't control it, he still felt like his things were about to be snatched away. Even if Li Qianxue was no longer his, he couldn't control himself. Wei Ting isn't a good match. You should stay away from him. As soon as the words came out of his mouth with a somewhat preaching tone, he knew that he had said something wrong. Sure enough, Li Qianxue, who was sitting behind the desk, raised her head at this moment. Her eyes were cold and mocking. He's not a good match. You are? Su Qinghui was speechless. Looking at the gorgeous face in front of him that had been treated well by time, he felt a toothache. He's so much younger than you. He doesn't look reliable and steady. If you really want to find one, you should choose one who looks more honest. Anyway, he didn't like this Wei Ting. No, it should be said that he didn't like all the men who were close to Li Qianxue. You're honest, but what happened in the end? Back then, when she was with Su Qinghui, old Master Li had never objected. After all, Su Qinghui looked very honest, steady, and reliable back then. But how did Su Qinghui repay him? Su Qinghui was speechless. At this point, he couldn't continue. His face was a little gloomy. He took a few steps forward and looked at Li Qianxue. There was a flash of regret in his eyes. In fact, regret surged in his heart from time to time after he knew that he had fallen in love with Li Qianxue. The longer it took, the more uncomfortable it made him. Qianxue, I already know that I was wrong. I already know that I was wrong. Can you give me a chance? Li Qianxue looked up at him and saw the pain on his face. She only felt happy. Yes, you know that you were wrong. The murderer also knows that he was wrong after he went to prison, but is it useful? He's already dead. Su Qinghui's face turned pale. He was speechless at Li Qianxue's words. Li Qianxue felt bored. It was really boring. In the past, Su Qinghui's casual words could make her feel uncomfortable and heartbroken. Now that the roles were reversed, she didn't feel much accomplishment. She was happy and happy. It only proved that she still cared about this man. Since she didn't care anymore, why should she say more? If you have something to say to me, just say it. I have a meeting later. Her impatient tone made Su Qinghui depressed. She was really getting more and more impatient with him now. I'm here for the Li Corporation's latest project. Su Qinghui was serious. When he talked about business, he was always very serious. I got the exact news that the North District is not planned to be a business district. If the Li Corporation decides to build a residential building there, it is no longer suitable. Li Qianxue leaned gently against the back of the chair. She raised her head and looked at Su Qinghui. You came here for this? Yes. Su Qinghui nodded. The idle land in the North District was auctioned last week. The other party wants to build a factory on it. It is very inappropriate for you to build a residential building at this time. Su Qinghui. Li Qianxue didn't look nervous. I've already asked about the planning. The result is similar to yours. However, I have an appointment with Mayor Li tonight. So, I thank you for your kindness. Li Junxing was Hu Jinyao's childhood friend, so he would still give face to the Li family. Besides, it was just a piece of land. The Li Corporation had a lot of land in their hands. This project just had a suitable plan. If there wasn't one, it wasn't impossible to change to something else. Su Qinghui looked at the confidence and certainty in Li Qianxue's eyes, and his heart trembled slightly. Whether it was more than 20 years ago or now, Li Qianxue's appearance was extremely eye-catching. She was a natural radiant. Her charm had nothing to do with her age, but the confidence that emanated from within. He smiled bitterly in his heart. How could he forget? She was Li Qianxue, not an ordinary woman. Half of the credit for the Li Corporation's success today was due to her. How could she not have a way to deal with it? I don't want to be nosy. Su Qinghui's expression was a little bitter. I'm just worried about you. Su Qinghui had always been cold in front of Li Qianxue. It was polite to say that he was cold. He had always been indifferent to her to the point that it made one's hair stand on end. In front of her, he used such a tone to express his worry for her. Even though he had done this many times in the past year, Li Qianxue's mood couldn't help but become a little strange. It was still the same face, elegant and handsome. Age also treated him very well. He didn't have the stink of a businessman on him. Instead, he looked like a scholar. If he wore a pair of glasses and stood in a university lecture hall, people would believe that he was a professor. Back then, wasn't half of the reason why she was fascinated by him because he had a good appearance? Realizing that her thoughts were developing in an uncontrollable direction, Li Qianxue's expression didn't look good. We're already divorced. If there's nothing else, leave. She refused to give him any chance. Su Qinghui looked at her for a long time. She just lowered her head to look at the documents and ignored him. He couldn't help but walk around the large office desk to stand in front of her and turn her chair around to face himself. Qianxue. Li Qianxue pressed her body tightly against the back of the chair and looked at him expressionlessly. Qianxue. Before the divorce he rarely called her by her name. Most of the time he just treated the word, you, as a form of address. After the divorce, her name became a thorn in his heart. Every time he called it, it hurt more. I really regret it. He held her hand. Her hand was slender and he wrapped her hand in his palm. His palm was much hotter than hers. He wrapped her hand tightly and looked down at her. Qianxue, let's start over, okay? He had already said the word sorry. If she didn't want to hear it, then he would say something else. He originally wanted to give her time to slowly calm down, until the damage could disappear without a trace. But Wei Ting's appearance today gave him a huge sense of crisis. Not to mention Wei Ting, even any random man would be more competitive than him. Because they had never hurt him, but he was the one who had hurt her the most. Qianxue. Li Qianxue was silent. She just looked at him. The office was very quiet, so quiet that it was almost strange. Su Qinghui. After pausing for nearly a minute, she finally spoke. When Su Peijian was 1 year old, she had just learned to walk. Of course at that time, I didn't know that she wasn't my daughter. I was very happy. I watched her walk in your direction with her little feet, and you were also very happy. I saw you hug her, I saw you kiss her face, and at that time, there was a very loving smile on your face. At that time, I thought that even if you didn't love me, your love for your daughter was real. So when I returned to the room, I asked you, can we forget that unpleasant beginning and live a good life? Do you still remember how you answered me? Su Qinghui knew that if she opened her mouth, she definitely wouldn't say anything good, but the feeling of her pinching his weak spot made his heart tighten. You said that I'm not worthy, you said. Li Qianshue's expression didn't look good either. In fact, the conversation after that was really not good. She really didn't want to recall it. Su Qinghui, it's been so many years. The hurtful words you've said to me and the things you've done to hurt me are the nails you've nailed to a wooden stake. Even if you pull out those nails now, there will still be scars on the wooden stake just like my heart. You've hurt me before and then you apologize. My heart already has a scar that can't be erased. You can pretend that nothing happened. You can pretend that it's in the past. You can say that you want to start over. But I can't. Su Qinghui, you've been in front of me for more than a year. Do you know how much I hate you? Every time you appear, you remind me how many wounds I have and how painful they are. Qianxue. Su Qinghui was speechless. He didn't know what to say. His calm and rational mind, which had been in the business world for a long time, was completely useless at this moment. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I just can't let go. Su Qinghui, you said that you don't want to let go. Then tell me, how can I forgive you? Her hand was still wrapped by him. She held his hand and placed it on her heart. Here, even though it's no longer bleeding, it's already riddled with holes. Su Qinghui, tell me, how can I forgive you with such a broken heart? Under his palm was her soft heart. Beneath her skin, her heart was beating again and again. He could feel her heartbeat and the coldness in her words. His hand stopped there, not even daring to exert force. Li Qianxue didn't want to say any more. She wanted to twist his hand away, but he suddenly reached out and hugged her. He hugged her very tightly and very hard. Because she was sitting down and he was bent over, he buried his face in the crook of her neck when he hugged her. Li Qianxue frowned and her face was a little gloomy. However, at this moment she felt the warmth on her neck and was stunned. She didn't move for a moment. She smelled faintly of roses. However, Su Qinghui in front of her didn't have any romantic thoughts at all. Qianxue, I don't need you to forgive me. He really didn't deserve forgiveness for what he had done. You just need to agree to let me guard you, okay? If you think your heart is dead, I can give you my heart. Okay. He looked up at her. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a deep pleading look in them. Li Qianxue gently pushed his body away and then stepped back, putting some distance between the two of them. Last month, Qingsang's child was 1 month old. Xiang Kaiping gave them a gift. Su Qinghui didn't understand what she meant by this sudden change of topic. Li Qianxue thought of the 2 sweaters she had accidentally seen. She felt a toothache and a faint jealousy. That's my daughter, my granddaughter. But she came to give me a gift as if she had become a grandmother. Xiang Kaiping, I know. She's very good to Qingsang. Qingsang is a sentimental person. She always remembers the kindness others have shown her. But the more she remembers, the more uncomfortable I feel. Do you know why? Because all of this didn't have to be like this. I could have taken care of my daughter by myself. I could have treated her well by myself. But because of you, because of your selfishness and cruelty, someone else got ahead of me. Xiang Kaiping got ahead of me and made a good impression on my daughter. People were like this. It was easy to be prejudiced. Xiang Kaiping appeared in front of Su Qingsang first. Even if Su Qingsang didn't have a mother-daughter relationship with her, she had cultivated a mother-daughter relationship with her. That was what she hated the most. She didn't need to say anything else. Su Qinghui understood everything. She didn't want to say it anymore. She turned around and picked up the document again, looking like she refused to talk anymore. Su Qinghui looked at her side profile and raised his hand to touch her several times. In the end he lowered it, turned around and left rather weakly. The office fell silent again. Li Qianxue couldn't bear to look at the document in front of her anymore. She chased Su Qinghui away, but she didn't feel happy in her heart. Every time she fought with Su Qinghui, she actually hurt the enemy 1,000 times and hurt herself 800 times. Her hurtful words could hurt Su Qinghui, but they also made her constantly recall the past. She shook her head. Now, she only hoped that she wouldn't see Su Qinghui as much as possible. After all, every time she saw him, she really couldn't be in a good mood. Li Qianxue was still thinking about not seeing Su Qinghui in the future, but that night, when she met Li Junxing, she saw him again. When she saw Su Qinghui sitting next to Li Junxing, Li Qianxue's expression didn't look good. She instinctively wanted to leave, but Li Junxing had already stood up. Auntie. Although Li Junxing was the mayor of a city, in front of him were Hua Jinyao's father-in-law and mother-in-law. It wasn't appropriate for him to be arrogant in front of these two people. Mayor Li, you're too polite. Li Qianxue entered the door. Basic politeness was still necessary. Coincidentally, Uncle has some ideas about the project in the north of the city, so I asked him to come with me. Auntie, you don't mind, do you? They were all here. In front of her, apart from Li Junxing, there was also Director Chen from the city construction and Secretary Li from the secretarial office. How could she say that she minded? Of course not. Chapter 7:13. He had seen someone he didn't want to see twice in one day. This made Li Qianxue's mood very bad, and she couldn't help but show some emotions on her face. If it wasn't for the fact that she saw that it wasn't small, she would still be able to suppress it. Especially now that there were outsiders around, she was able to maintain her composure. Mayor Li, Chief Chen, Secretary Li. After greeting them one by one, he sat down beside Li Junxing. There was an empty seat next to it, and Su Qinghui's seat was just beyond it. As she sat down, she gestured for Director Chen and Secretary Li to sit down as well. Unexpectedly, Su Qinghui stood up and moved to the seat next to her. There aren't many people here. It'll be more lively if we sit together. He spoke calmly, but Li Qianxue was furious. Li Junxing sensed that the atmosphere wasn't right. He smiled and tried to smooth things over. Yes. There are no outsiders here, so let's sit together. He had been in Lin City for more than 2 years. Director Chen's ability was quite good, and he was willing to give him a chance to guide him. Li Qianxue couldn't point out Li Junxing's face. Although his seniority was lower, he was still the mayor of a city. She couldn't really lose face here. She resisted the urge to get up. After toasting Li Junxing with a cup of tea and waiting for the dishes to be served, she first talked about the land in the North District. A large enterprise like the Li Corporation would always have a few pieces of land that were auctioned off. She had already planned to build a high-end residential area in that area, because he knew that a business district would be built near that piece of land. However, now that the plan had changed and they were not going to build a business circle, the Li Corporation's idea of building a high-end residential area would have to change. Andy, don't worry. It's not a big deal. Li Junxing glanced at Bureau Chief Chen as he spoke. Bureau Chief Chen said, "Don't worry about this. The reason why the factory is being built in the North District is because Chief Gao of the Investment Promotion Agency has taken over a company. But now you know that when companies set up factories here, they have very strict environmental requirements. They didn't have a suitable piece of land, so they decided to go to the North District, but we haven't made a decision yet. Nothing has been decided yet." What if it's decided? Su Qinghui had heard that Director Gao was very good at attracting investment. The higher-ups also attached great importance to him. The company that Director Gao took in is a paper mill. As you know, paper mills usually cause a lot of pollution. As long as the city doesn't approve it, they can't build a mill on this land. Li Qianxue understood what Director Chen meant, but she thought of something else. But what if the other party do complete the procedures and do environmental protection? You guys don't worry. In the past few years, Lin City has been developing quite well. Many companies want to set up factories here. When the time comes, you can resell the land. It won't be a loss. Li Qianxue didn't think that way. This was the most helpless way. Ti Lin to Lin. Ti de Chen to Lin to Li City. However, Director Chen's words also made sense. Li Junxing looked at Li Qianxue's face, which didn't seem to be very pleasant, and suddenly smiled. There is actually another way out. T to say to that to Lin that there was not the Lin to Lin is T to have to say half. Lin to that has T Li that there by has the to be to him. I think it's feasible if you two join hands to build a large amusement park there. The Chanyu Group had experience in this area. The Li Corporation had done it before. When the two companies worked together, the project might not be profitable immediately, but it could greatly increase the Li Corporation's reputation. Li Qianxue was silent. That wasn't a good solution. She had thought about doing something else before, but in terms of income, it was easier to recover money in the short term by building a house. You guys are quite familiar with Tianyu. I've asked Jin Yao and he thinks this plan is feasible. Thank you, Mayor Li. Li Qianxue knew that Li Qianxue was being kind. No matter what, the investment wasn't small. She would have to see the opinions of the board of directors. After dinner, Li Junxing didn't arrange any other projects because he knew that he was older than Li Qianxue and Su Qinghui. He just told her not to worry. If there were any changes, he would inform her in time. With this guarantee, Li Qianxue was reassured. After saying goodbye to Li Junxing and the others, Li Qianxue left the restaurant. She took out her phone and planned to call Xiao Zhao and ask him to pick her up. Su Qinghui stood behind her and watched her movements. Let me give you a ride. No need. Li Qianxue didn't turn her head or look at him. It's not easy to park here. Xiao Zhao's car must be parked very far away. Why don't I give you a ride? It's not easy to park Xiao Zhao's car, but yours? It's just across the street. I'll give you a ride. No need. We're not that close. Li Qianxue continued to call Xiao Zhao, but before she could dial out, the phone rang first. It was Xiao Zhao. He said in a very urgent voice that his mother accidentally fell and was now in the hospital. He was rushing to the hospital and asked her if he could get another driver to pick her up if the dinner was not over. Since your mother is in the hospital, take care of her first. Li Qianxue had never been a mean boss. I'll get Xiaoyin to pick her up. After thinking for a moment, Li Qianxue added, see how the situation is. If it's serious, tell me my name and ask Director Zhua of City 1 Hospital to arrange someone for you. Okay, I will. Thank you, madam. After hanging up the phone, she was thinking of calling Xiaoyin. Su Qinghui took a step forward. The Li family is not close to here. It's not convenient for Xiaoyin to come out so late. Let me give you a ride. I can take a taxi. Li Qianxue took 2 steps outside as she spoke. Feeling Su Qinghui following behind her, she stopped. Her gaze swept over Su Qinghui, and the corners of her lips curled up with a hint of mockery. If I didn't know you well, I would have thought that Xiao Zhao's mother's fall had something to do with you. Su Qinghui's expression changed slightly, but only for a moment. Qianxue, are you complimenting me? Su Qinghui. Li Qianxue laughed. I didn't know that after the divorce, your skin has become thicker. If being thick-skinned can get you back, what's the harm in being thick-skinned for once? On the main road, in the gentle night breeze, the man in front of her was wearing a dark suit and saying such words that sounded like a confession of love. Li Qianxue knew that Su Qinghui had changed a lot since the divorce, but the Su Qinghui in front of her still made her a little uncomfortable. While she was distracted, Su Qinghui reached out and took the bag in her hand. Let's go, I'll give you a ride. Li Qianxue didn't expect Su Qinghui to do this. She reached out to grab her bag. However, he put the bag in his other hand and held her hand with his free hand. Su Qinghui. They were on the main road, and Li Qianxue's upbringing prevented her from doing anything to him. Her hesitation gave Su Qinghui a chance. In just a short while, he had already taken her to the opposite side of the road, where he parked his car. Su Qinghui rarely drove by himself in the past. When he was in the Li family, he had a driver. After divorcing Li Qianxue, he began to slowly get used to doing some things by himself. He opened the car door and gestured for Li Qianxue to get in. Li Qianxue glared at him and reached out to take the bag in his hand. Qianxue, we're husband and wife. Even if you don't have any feelings for me now, we still have 2 children, right? Do you have to treat me like an enemy? Aren't we enemies? Li Qianxue stood still. From the day you replaced my daughter and made her an illegitimate daughter, we were already enemies. Su Qinghui's face froze and then he smiled bitterly. Qianxue, if you really treat me as an enemy, What you have to do now is to think of ways to torture me and take revenge on me. That makes me unhappy. Isn't it? Do you think I haven't thought about it? The reason why I don't take revenge on you isn't because I don't hate you, nor is it because I can't do it. It's because I still want to take care of the child. I'm not like you. I can't be so biased and cruel to my own child. There was no way to talk about this. Su Qinghui knew that Li Qianxue had always been a person of her word. He also knew that in her heart, he had already been isolated from her. Get in the car. He didn't try to explain or defend himself anymore. Some things were done and they were done. If she didn't understand, then so be it. The more he explained, the more unsightly he looked. Since that was the case, there was no need to explain. It's getting late. I'll send you back first. His sudden change in attitude made Li Qianxue unable to say the sarcastic words that she wanted to say. Looking at the bag in Su Qinghui's hand, Li Qianxue got into the car. Su Qinghui followed her into the car. The car was very quiet. Li Qianxue had nothing to say to him. The car drove in the direction of the Li family. Not only was Li Qianxue familiar with this road, but Su Qinghui was also familiar with it. Li Qianxue didn't want to face him, so she turned her face out of the car window and pretended to look at the scenery. Just now at the dining table, she drank a glass of wine. With her alcohol tolerance, she naturally didn't get drunk. However, during this period of time she had a lot of work on her hands, so she could be considered very busy. The Li family was near the suburbs and the journey wasn't short. Su Qinghui was used to driving very slowly, and Li Qianxue actually unknowingly felt sleepy. Su Qinghui's car stopped 10 minutes away from the Li family's house. He had just realized that Li Qianxue had fallen asleep, and she seemed to be in a deep sleep. He parked the car by the side of the road and didn't turn on the interior lights. He just looked at Li Qianxue with the light from the road outside. In the past, the two of them had actually had many opportunities to sit in the same car. In the past, no matter how hard he tried to convince himself that he didn't love her. However, as the president and general manager of the Li Corporation, they had to face many situations together. In the past, every time they got into the car, she would sit on one side and he would sit on the other. There was a large distance between the two of them. In the beginning, she would actually take the initiative to approach him. She would snuggle up to him and talk to him about the company and the children. However, at that time he thought that he hated her and didn't pay much attention to her. No matter what she said, he ignored her. After a long time she didn't get close anymore. Of course she still talked. After all, with their positions, not to mention the two children, there were also many things to discuss in the company. However, they really didn't have much time to attend events together. Therefore at this time those memories became even more precious. Now he wanted to hear her continue. He wanted her to smile at him and talk to him like before, but it was already too difficult. He raised his hand and inched closer to her face. She had taken good care of herself. Even at this age, not to mention spots and fine lines, it was rare to see a single pore on her face. His hand got closer and closer and finally, it was placed on her face. It was as smooth and delicate as he had imagined. He just put it there and didn't do anything else. When he really touched the person he missed, he realized that his regret was deeper than he had thought. Why was he so stubborn? Why didn't he see his heart clearly earlier? If he had known that he would have such a day, he definitely wouldn't have done those things. However, there were no ifs. Looking at Li Qianxue, who was asleep and unaware, Su Qinghui's emotions were a little turbulent. He couldn't help but move his face closer and closer. Those red lips that were inches away from him made him move closer and closer as if he was possessed. It was also at this moment that Li Qianxue suddenly opened her eyes. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw Su Qinghui's enlarged face in front of her. There was also his hand on her face, and his lips that were almost touching hers. Without thinking, Li Qianxue raised her hand and slapped Su Qinghui's face. With a pa sound, Su Qinghui was hit squarely by her. She had just woken up and was in a daze, so her hand wasn't strong. Su Qinghui was hit and his face tilted slightly, but that was all. "Do you want to hit this side as well?" he said. "That way it'll be symmetrical." Crazy. Li Qianxue couldn't bear it anymore. She really raised her hand and was about to slap the other side of his face. Su Qinghui grabbed her hand. He didn't use much force, just holding her and not letting her move. "Sorry, I just couldn't help it." She couldn't help it. Li Qianxue pulled her hand back, and the coldness on her face didn't diminish. "Yes, you couldn't help it, so you came to take advantage of me? Su Qinghui, you're really good." Well, this was his fault. Su Qinghui couldn't be bothered to explain anymore. He directly grabbed the hand that was about to leave, and his face was a little more serious than before. "Qianxue, I think there are still other ways to solve the new project in the North District even if we don't cooperate with the Tianyu group. He suddenly got down to business, which made Li Qianxue a little uncomfortable. She pulled her hand back and looked at the person in front of her. What way? Li Qianxue's expression calmed down a little. Today, it seemed that she had received Li Juanxing's guarantee, but in fact, every change would bring about a new change in the plan. She had personally participated in the planning of the residential area in the North District. She was not in a good mood when the plan suddenly changed. She didn't expect Su Qinghui to have a way. Chapter 7:14. In the night breeze, under the streetlight, she stared at him with a burning gaze. This had not happened for a long time. Su Qinghui almost couldn't help but want to hold her in his arms. In the past, he had never thought of getting close to her, but now he always wanted to find an opportunity to get close to her. 10 years to the east, 10 years to the west. Su Qinghui. Li Qianxue couldn't wait for an answer. She had already lost her patience. If you don't want to say it, then say it. In any case, it wasn't a big deal. At most, they would lose a few $100 million. It wasn't that the Li Corporation couldn't afford the loss. However, it would take a lot of effort to convince the shareholders. You don't want me to tell you my plan on the street, do you? Su Qinghui gently withdrew his hand, and the smile on his face was faint. In just a few seconds, he had returned to his usual elegant appearance. Where are you going to say it? You should know that I don't have the habit of eating supper. Li Qianxue paid great attention to health. Not to mention that the Li family usually ate light food. At night, apart from occasionally eating a bowl of bird's nest to calm her nerves, she did not eat anything else. If Su Qinghui wanted to find another place to talk, she might not be willing to listen. Why don't we go to your office tomorrow and talk in detail? Li Qianxue found it hard to laugh. Su Qinghui, I didn't know you were so shameless. How is that shameless? Su Qinghui's expression was sincere. I care about the Li group. I just don't want you to suffer losses. Ha! Li Qianxue sneered. Haven't I suffered enough at your hands? Yes, quite a lot. Su Qinghui admitted frankly. Half of his body crossed the car seat and moved closer to Li Qianxue. That's why I hope to have a chance to make up for it. Sweet words and charming beauty. Li Qianxue was unmoved. Her appearance was gorgeous. Even at her age, it only made her look a little calmer and more noble than young women. The coldness in her eyes didn't make Su Qinghui retreat. On the contrary, it made him even more annoyed and eager to redeem himself. Do you want to know my plan or not? Su Qinghui held her hand. According to my plan, the proposal can still be used. The Li Group will not suffer any loss. The Li Corporation won't suffer any losses now. But the profits will be discounted. What if I can guarantee that not only will the Li Corporation's income not be discounted, but it will be even better than your original plan? Li Qianxue was about to pull her hand back, but she stopped because of Su Qinghui's words. Although she hated this person now, she had to admit one thing. That was Su Qinghui's means and ability. They had been married for more than 20 years. She had followed him all the way to bring the Li Corporation to where it was today. Naturally, she knew it. Su Qinghui, you have to know that the Li Group today doesn't care about the loss of hundreds of millions. What makes you think that I would give you a chance to get close to me for a piece of land? It's true that the Li Corporation doesn't care, but if you want to convince those shareholders, you'll have to spend a lot of effort. With me around, I can help you avoid these troubles. Why not? Li Qianxue sat still. Su Qinghui leaned forward a little more. If it's my proposal, it can double the profits of the Li Group. I think those shareholders will not only not make things difficult for you, but they will also thank you, right? There was silence in the carriage. Li Qianxue knew that what he said was the truth. In fact, the shareholders of the company had some complaints about Su Qinghui leaving the Li Group. After all, the benefits of the shareholders had increased every year since Su Qinghui took over the Li Group. In the year that Li Qianxue took over, there naturally wouldn't be any big trouble. However, Su Qinghui was in charge of some of the businesses before. She did spend a few months to bring the company on the right track and appease the shareholders. Qianxue, can't you believe me just once? Li Qianxue looked at the enlarged face in front of her. She suddenly retracted her hand and leaned against the back of the chair. Take me home. No objection meant that she agreed. Li Qianxue had always valued the Li Corporation. In her heart, other than her family, only her own company could make her care about it. Su Qinghui was more or less relieved. He was afraid that Li Qianxue wouldn't even take the Li Corporation seriously. At that time he would really be in trouble. Seeing Li Qianxue turn her face to look at the street view, Su Qinghui inexplicably leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. When Li Qianxue glared at him, he quickly sat up straight and started the car. Su Qinghui. Li Qianxue hadn't been so angry for a long time. Don't go too far. Yes. I'll be careful next time. Su Qinghui turned to look at her. Next time I'll definitely ask for your permission. Who would agree to such a thing? Since you didn't object, I'll take it that you agreed. Li Qianxue was about to flare up again, but she realized that she had taken the initiative to talk to him. Annoyed, she turned her face away from him. The car stopped at the Li family's villa. Su Qinghui's car didn't want to enter the villa, but the villa's sensor door directly opened when it scanned his car license plate number. Su Qinghui drove in just like that. This action made Li Qianxue quite angry again. She was going to tell Uncle Zhang tomorrow to delete Su Qinghui's license plate number from the database so that he wouldn't be able to enter again. We're here. Su Qinghui stopped the car and found that Li Qianxue was still angry. He looked calm on the surface, but his heart was actually very bitter. I'll go to your office tomorrow afternoon to look for you. Li Qianxue didn't want to talk to him anymore and got out of the car. Qianxue, Su Qinghui suddenly called out to her. She stopped in her tracks and didn't turn around. Good night. Sweet dreams. Li Qianxue had a headache. She quickened her steps and quickly went into the main residence. Unexpectedly, when she entered the door, old Master Li was still awake. Recently he had liked playing chess. He had gone to Rong City a few times and played chess with old Master Hua. The two of them were equally good at chess. There were wins and losses in the game. In the past they didn't interact much. Now that he had great-grandchildren, he would probably have to go to Rong City more often. Therefore he was especially willing to spend time in this area. Qianxue. Come. What's your next step? No matter how emotional Li Qianxue was outside, when she returned home and faced her old father, she restrained her emotions. Let me see. She walked to the chessboard and stood still. Before she could ask, old Master Li stared at the chessboard and spoke without raising his head. Did Qinghui send you back? Li Qianxue was stunned. She knew that old Master Li had seen it, so she didn't deny it. Yes. We're fine. Li Qianxue sat down opposite him. She picked up the black piece and placed it on the chessboard. I had an appointment with Mayor Li today. He happened to be there. When I came back, Xiao Zhao had something to do. He said he would send me back. Old Master Li picked up the white piece and placed it on the chessboard. Yes, we met by chance. But he has been courting you very hard this year, hasn't he? Li Qianxue's expression almost changed. Dad, which eye of yours saw him courting me? No. Old Master Li finally raised his head to look at her. You went to Rong City and he went to Rong City. You asked Mayor Li and he also asked Mayor Li. Isn't it the same as sending you home? He went to Rong City to see Qing Sang, not for me. As for the appointment with Mayor Li, his new company also has a lot of things to deal with. What does it have to do with me? So, you don't plan to remarry? Of course not. Li Qianxue raised her voice. Even if I don't get married in this life, I won't get involved with him again. Old Master Li was silent and looked at the chessboard in his eyes. It's fine, but it's impossible not to get married. I heard that there is a young man who has been courting you very hard. Dad, where did you hear that? Why not? The other party helped our company upgrade the software, and he could have left after the upgrade. In the end, he came to our company every day to fix the loopholes in the company's website and treat us to meals. Isn't that courting? Dad, it's impossible for me and Wei Ting. Don't think too much. Maybe not. Bring him to me next time. I'm not that kind of stubborn old man. If I really like him, a few years difference doesn't matter. Dad, is that a few years difference? A dozen years difference. If it were in ancient times, I could be his mother. What are you thinking? Marriage is free, love is free. Look at that French president. Didn't he also find someone much older than him? Dad. Li Qianxue found that she couldn't communicate with old Master Li anymore. All right, I know my own business. Don't worry about it. I don't want to worry about you either. It's just that I'm old. Yusen went to school. Although he said that he would come back in a few years, when he came back he would probably have a family. Qing Sang is far away in Rong City. Even if the transportation is convenient, the number of times you can meet is limited. It doesn't matter if I'm old. But I also want you to have someone by your side. I don't know what I can help you with, but it's good to accompany you and take care of you. If you don't like Qinghui and that young man, many of the families of some family friends have lost their wives. You can see when the time comes. If you meet someone suitable, you should find another one. Li Qianxue's lips moved. She looked at the white hair on old Master Li's head. She was about to agree, but the words that came out of her mouth changed, and in the end, there was still some resistance. Dad, it's easy for you to say that. Find someone to take care of me. Let's not talk about the fact that I don't need anyone to take care of me. Even if I really find someone like Su Qinghui, haven't I had enough of him for the past 20 years? Old Master Li was speechless, and his expression didn't look good for a moment. Li Qinxue softened her tone. Dad, don't worry about my matters. It's good that it's like this now. Besides, my children are all grown up. I'm really not in the mood. There was a hint of guilt in old Master Li's eyes. In the end, once bitten, twice shy. You've been hurt by Qinghui. If you say so, then so be it. Li Qinxue didn't deny it. My passion has been exhausted. If you really want me to love someone and be with someone now, I really can't get excited. So, Dad, don't worry about my matters for now, okay? I'm an old person. I can take care of myself. I also know what's good for me. Old Master Li had nothing to say. The father and daughter looked at each other without saying anything. In the end, Li Qinxue went upstairs to rest. Standing at the door, still holding Li Qinshue's bag in his hand, Su Qinghui, who was thinking of bringing her in. He stood at the door, which was not tightly closed, and heard the entire conversation between the father and daughter. However, the expression on his face was very complicated. Li Qinxue couldn't get up to look for someone else, which was a good thing for him. At least it meant that before he won her back, she wouldn't let anyone else enter her heart. However, when he thought that the person who made her like this was him, Su Qinghui's heart suddenly ached faintly. His heart felt as if it was being pricked by a thin needle. It was stuffy and stinging. He hung the bag in his hand on the handle of the door. Su Qinghui didn't go in again. He turned around and left quietly. Li Qinxue entered the company early in the morning. She had a regular meeting to attend. After the meeting, she agreed to have lunch with a cooperative factory at noon. After lunch, she took a nap. She had always had the habit of taking a nap. Therefore, there was also a small lounge attached to the office. It wasn't big, but it had everything inside. Yang Rong knew her habit, so she never bothered her when she was asleep. However, today was an exception. Su Qinghui came and said that he had made an appointment with Li Qinxue yesterday. Yang Rong knew that the two of them weren't on good terms now. However, since Su Qinghui said that, she definitely had to report it. Su Qinghui didn't stand on ceremony and just followed behind her. Li Qinshue's body was considered healthy among her peers. It was just that her blood pressure was a little low. Every time she woke up, she wouldn't be able to get up for a while. She would have to wait for a while before she slowly woke up. Yang Rong knew her habit, and Su Qinghui naturally knew it too. In the past 20 years, Su Qinghui didn't care about Li Qinsue. So he didn't care about her health. He knew that Li Qinsue had low blood pressure because one time last year, Li Qinsue woke up dizzy and staggered 2 steps. Later, the family doctor came over to check and told him. He followed Yang Rong into the door and saw that Li Qinsue had just sat up. Yes, what's the matter? Her eyes were half open as she looked at Yang Rong in front of her. She had been Li Qinshue's secretary for many years, so Li Qinsue naturally trusted her. President Su came over and said that he has something to talk to you about. President Su? Li Qinsue covered her mouth and yawned. Which President Su? President Su. He said that he made an appointment with you yesterday. Yesterday? Li Qinsue remembered that Su Qinghui said yesterday that he had a plan that could increase the income of the land in the North District by hundreds of millions. Yes, let him in. Yang Rong received a definite answer and didn't ask any more questions. She turned around and realized that Su Qinghui had actually followed her in. Her lips moved slightly. Thinking that they were once husband and wife and had seen everything, she didn't stay any longer. She gestured to Su Qinghui and left. Li Qinsue sat there. Just now, Yang Rong had blocked most of Su Qinghui's body, so she didn't notice that he had come in. When she woke up, she thought of Su Qinghui's visit. Her brows furrowed and she was a little unhappy. Thanks to Su Qinghui's kiss yesterday, Li Qinsue didn't sleep well last night. Throughout the night, the dreams came back and forth. Most of them were from the past 20 years, but in the past year or so, Su Qinghui had repeatedly approached her. She didn't do what she had told old Master Li. Instead, she felt that Su Qinghui's repeated appearances had disrupted her normal pace. This made her very unhappy. Su Qinghui appeared in front of her at this moment. She had just woken up and her hair was a little messy. It was draped behind her head. Naturally, she couldn't wear a coat when she slept. The shirt inside was already wrinkled. At this moment, she was looking at him with a slight frown. Su Qinghui couldn't help but take a step forward and stand in front of her. Qianxue. His low voice was filled with affection. In fact, he had seen Li Qianxue's more casual appearance at home. But at that time he felt that he hated her, so no matter what she looked like, she didn't enter his eyes. The situation in front of him was reversed. In his eyes, the unconscious Li Qianxue in front of him was somewhat cute. If you're sleepy, sleep a little longer. His voice was very soft and it sounded extremely gentle. However, Li Qianxue woke up because of his words. She stood up and looked at the person in front of her. Why are you here? Her face changed too quickly, especially the obvious disgust in her eyes. Su Qinghui's heart was stifled. We made an appointment yesterday. Have you forgotten? As he spoke, he waved a folder on his hand. Li Qianxue also remembered at this moment, but her expression didn't look much better. You go out first. Su Qinghui rarely came to this lounge in the past. Now that they were divorced, it was even more unnecessary. Su Qinghui didn't intend to provoke her here. Okay, I'll wait for you outside. After he left, Li Qianxue went to the bathroom next door with a rather ugly expression. She washed her face as quickly as possible and tidied herself up. When she went out again, she returned to her usual coldness. She walked to the desk and sat down. After pressing the internal line and asking Yang Rong to bring in 2 cups of tea, she glanced at Su Qinghui. You can speak now. Su Qinghui didn't beat around the bush with her. He directly pushed a plan in front of her. Li Qianxue glanced at him and reached out to pick it up. She casually flipped through 2 pages, and her expression changed from casual to serious. She was so focused that she didn't notice when Yang Rong brought the tea in. Yang Rong looked at her and quietly went out again. When she left, she didn't forget to quietly close the door. Li Qianxue read the plan very carefully from beginning to end. Finally, she placed the plan on the table and pressed one hand on it. Who planned it? Did you do it? I did it. However, 2 newcomers from the company also gave me some suggestions. Li Qianxue didn't say anything. According to Su Qinghui, no matter what was built in the empty land next to the North District, it wouldn't affect it. More importantly, this plan was better than the one previously proposed by the planning department of the big corporation. She glanced at Su Qinghui with a complicated expression. She was initially attracted to Su Qinghui because of his ability. Speaking of which, neither of the 2 elders of the Su family was in business. Su Qinghui's mother was a nurse, and his father was just an ordinary employee. However, Su Qinghui was particularly talented in business. This was indeed something that others couldn't be envious of. This plan was indeed not bad. In addition, with the help of the Tianyu group, the 2 families would develop it together. The benefits in the future would definitely be considerable. Hua Jinyao was her son-in-law. She didn't need to worry about whether he was willing or not. Your conditions. Su Qinghui glanced at her as if he didn't understand what she meant. I said, what are your conditions? Li Qianxue's expression was serious, and there was a hint of seriousness on her face. You know this plan of yours very well. It's indeed very good. So what are your conditions? Su Qinghui didn't answer her question. Instead, he said as if he was asking for credit, just not bad? I thought you would say that my plan is perfect. Su Qinghui. Li Qianxue didn't want to give him such a high hat. Tell me directly, what are your conditions? If it had been someone else, she would have praised the person who had written the plan. However, if that person was Su Qinghui, then forget it. Qianxue, can I give this plan to you? You're being unaccountably solicitous. Li Qianxue didn't say the second half of the sentence, but Su Qinghui understood. He smiled bitterly. Her attitude really gave him a headache. My company has just started. Although it has been developing well recently, I can't handle such a plan. You should know this as well. Of course Li Qianxue knew. She also knew that although Su Qinghui's company had been developing well for more than a year since his divorce, such a big project was really too big for his new company. So you're trying to say that you're going to give me such an almost perfect plan for free? I'm not saying that I'm giving it away for free. I want a chance. While Su Qinghui was still thinking about how to choose his words, Li Qianxue let go of his hand and pushed the plan back in front of him. I'm sorry, I can't give you the chance you want. Qianxue. Su Qinghui was stunned for a moment. Li Qianxue sneered, and the expression on her face had changed to one of displeasure. You want me to give you a chance with a plan? Su Qinghui, do you really think you're so shameless? Not to mention that she had no intention of getting back together with him. Even if she did, she was very dissatisfied with his use of the opportunity to threaten her. Qianxue, in your heart, is my character so despicable now? Almost. Li Qinshua's expression was cold. I won't say much else. I won't agree to your conditions. You can go. Su Qinghui sighed. Li Qinshua's personality was daring. In the past he felt that she was very clear about love and hate, but now he was very annoyed. It was very difficult to change her mind. I'm talking about a chance. I mean, if possible, can I also participate in this project? The Li Corporation and Chanyu Group eat the meat, and our small company can just follow behind and drink some soup. This time it was Li Qinshua's turn to be stunned. In fact, Su Qinghui's request was completely reasonable. He was the one who planned this case, so it was understandable that their company wanted to get involved. It wasn't too much for him to say this, but Li Qinshui was thinking of another thing now. If she agreed, then for a long time she and Su Qinghui would definitely have to interact with each other because of work matters. This was something she didn't want to see. Li Qinshui was silent for a moment. Su Qinghui seemed to know what she was thinking. He pushed the plan in Li Qinshui's direction again. Qinshui, you should know that with the current conditions of the Li Corporation and the help of Tianyu Group, plus this plan, how much benefit will it bring to the Li Corporation? If you don't agree because of me, the shareholders will probably be unhappy, right? That's my business, not yours. The Li family accounted for the majority of the shares. She believed that even if the shareholders were unhappy, they wouldn't dare to make things too difficult for her. Chapter 7:15. Li Qinshui looked at the leisurely expression on his face and gritted her teeth secretly. After sharing a bed with Su Qinghui for more than 20 years, how could she not understand that this was just his way of provoking her? If she really agreed, she would have to deal with Su Qinghui a lot in a short period of time for such a big project. Seriously speaking, this land was bought by Su Qinghui before he left the Li Corporation. Later, because of the cooperation with Tianyu Group on several projects, the use of this land was temporarily put on hold. Su Qinghui obviously knew this, so after the Li Corporation came up with his own plan, he took out the plan in his hand again. He was probably waiting for this day. For this day he had really put in a lot of effort. She didn't speak with a cold face. She was in a bad mood, so her face naturally showed some emotions. If possible, she didn't want to see Su Qinghui. But he was right about one thing. She was indeed a person who separated public and private interests. She wouldn't let her personal emotions affect the company's operations. Letting Su Qinghui leave the company was already one of the few times she couldn't separate public and private interests. Qinshui, you didn't lose anything, did you? Su Qinghui looked into her eyes and didn't mind continuing to persuade her. In fact, you and I both know that even if you cooperate with Tianyu Group, it will be more convenient for me to do some things. After all, after so many years, I know the relationship between the Li Corporation as well as you do. Don't make it sound like I can't do it without you, and the Li Corporation can't operate without you. Of course it can. Su Qinghui didn't deny it. However, just take it that I don't want you to be too tired. So, wouldn't it be better for me to do these things? You make it sound so dignified, as if you didn't benefit from it. Yes, I benefited. Su Qinghui smiled. His face exuded a sense of elegance. The older a man was, the more popular he was. This was also true for Su Qinghui. The Su Qinghui in front of her was still the Su Qinghui, but in the past year he had changed a lot. The most obvious point was that he smiled in front of her a lot more than before. In her memory, Su Qinghui always had a cold face, and he always spoke to her in a neutral tone. Now, Su Qinghui always smiled in front of her from time to time. Sometimes her expression was obviously very ugly, but he could ignore it. She was not used to Su Qinghui's behavior. Li Qinshui stepped back a little without a trace. However, there was a chair behind him and he had nowhere to retreat to. Su Qinghui didn't feel depressed or unhappy when he noticed her dodging. It would be abnormal if she could accept him so easily. So, Qinshui, do you agree to my suggestion now? This is a suggestion? This is clearly a threat. Li Qinshui stood up to avoid his approach. She stepped back from the back of the office chair and looked at him. Su Qinghui, stop beating around the bush. I know what your goal is. You did a good job with the planning. I admit it. But your goal will fail in the end. Even if you agree, don't forget, since you're so worried that I'll be tired, I can just wash my hands of it, can't I? In short, she just didn't want to have a chance to meet him. She wanted to keep a distance from him. Su Qinghui understood. Yes, you can wash your hands of this. I don't want to use this to achieve anything. As for convincing you to change your mind, I can take my time. I can take my time. Li Qinshui was not used to Su Qinghui's constant confession of his love to everyone. This unfamiliarity made her automatically delete and block all of Su Qinghui's words. Instead, she treated everything he said as his flowery words and didn't take it seriously at all. If you have nothing else, you can leave. Qinxue, are you burning the bridge after crossing it? Su Qinghui seemed to sigh helplessly. Okay, then I'll leave first. Qinxue, I'll get someone to print out the contract tomorrow. I'll come to you to sign it. Li Qinxue pursed her lips into a straight line. At this moment she suddenly regretted it. No matter how perfect the plan was, so what if it was worth hundreds of millions? When she thought of meeting Su Qinghui and reconnecting with him, she immediately felt her entire mood begin to become gloomy. Su Qinghui, however, seemed to be completely unaware of her struggle. Qinxue, if you feel that any part of the contract is inappropriate and want to change it, you can tell me. You have my phone number. Even if there's nothing else, if there's anything else you want me to do, I can do it. Li Qinxue was impatient to listen to his sweet words. In the past, she couldn't hear them even if she wanted to. Now, no matter how much he said, she wouldn't believe him. The door is over there. Please go ahead. After Su Qinghui left, Li Qinxue focused all her attention on work. She finally got rid of the depression brought about by the matter of working with Su Qinghui. However, when she was about to get off work, another person who gave her a headache came. Wei Ting appeared in his office with a large bouquet of roses in his arms. Looking at the extremely exaggerated bouquet of 99 roses, Li Qinxue really felt a headache coming on. Seeing her expression, Wei Ting took a step forward at the right time with a fawning expression on his face. Qinxue, you didn't forget, did you? I made an appointment with you yesterday to have dinner together tonight. Li Qinxue didn't lose her memory, so she naturally remembered what she had agreed to in order to send this person away yesterday. Flowers for a beauty. Wei Ting handed the roses in his hand to Li Qinxue. The smile on his face was very sunny. Qinxue, what do you want to eat tonight? Li Qinxue thought about what old Master Li had said when she went out this morning and looked at Wei Ting with some hesitation. Wei Ting, can we have dinner next time? I promised my dad to go home for dinner today. During this period of time, she had always had social engagements. It had been a few days since she had eaten with old Master Li. Wei Ting's eyes lit up, as if he had suddenly found a direction. Isn't that perfect? I can visit old Master Li too. Wei Ting stopped fooling around. How could Li Qinxue meet him as an elder? I'm not fooling around. Wei Ting blinked his eyes. His young and sunny face looked sincere. I can go and tell uncle that I want to pursue you. I can also get him to agree to my pursuit. Li Qinxue wanted to laugh. Sometimes, the Wei Ting in front of her really made her feel like she was looking at a child. Wei Ting, first of all, if you want to pursue me, you don't need my father's consent. You need my consent. Second, I don't think we've reached the point of meeting your parents yet. Third, we're really not suitable for each other. If I were you, I would stop thinking about you now. I don't understand. Qinxue, you always say that we're not suitable. How are we not suitable? Wei Ting, how old are you this year? 34 years old. What's wrong? He was 33 years old. But at this time, Wei Ting didn't mind saying that he was older. I'm 48 years old. Li Qinxue had never avoided talking about her age. I'm 14 years older than you. According to the ancient calculations, I can almost be your mother. My mother isn't as young as you. Wei Ting looked at Li Qinshue's well-maintained fair face without a trace of fine lines or spots with a serious expression. My mother gave birth to me late, so don't worry. My mother looks like she's of the same generation as you. What's more, in your current state, even if you tell others that you're my sister, no one will believe you, let alone my sister. Li Qinxue looked to be in her early 30s at most. If she took off this suit and wore it younger, people would believe her if she said that she was less than 30. Wei Ting. Was that the point? That was not the point at all. I just want to explain why it's impossible for us. That's what you think. I think it's very possible. Wei Ting, I already have a son and a daughter. Especially my daughter. I feel very guilty towards her. I only have these 2 children in my life. I know. So what? That means that even if what you said is serious, even if you really don't mind that I'm married, have children, and even become a grandmother, I don't believe that you don't even mind if you have your own children. Wei Ting frowned. For the past half a year, Li Qinxue had been saying that she wasn't suitable for him. But this was the first time she had talked about children. He frowned. He had really thought about Li Qinshue's problem. If you really want to be with me, I think we can adopt. See, you still don't understand what I mean. Li Qinxue didn't mind explaining again. I said that I feel very guilty towards my daughter, which means that I no longer have the energy to love other children, no matter who gave birth to that child. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about giving all her love to Su Yusun and Su Qingsang for the rest of her life. Su Yusun was a boy. After he graduated, got married, and had children. No matter what, she had watched him grow up and raised him by her side. She didn't feel that guilty. But towards Su Qingsang her guilt was real. This kind of guilt wouldn't disappear just because Su Qingsang got married and met a husband who treated her very well. She was already prepared. When Su Yusun graduated and could slowly take over the company, she wanted to go to Rong City. She was Su Qingsang's biological mother. What she could do couldn't be less than Xiang Caiping's mother, right? That doesn't matter. It's fine as long as I have a child I love. I don't mind. Li Qianshua's attitude changed at this moment. She looked at Wei Ting very seriously. The boy in front of her, who was more than 10 years younger than her, said such serious words, which surprised her very much. Even if he didn't use his brain and just said it to coax her, she couldn't help but feel a little touched. She had the feeling of liking someone but not getting a response. Even if Wei Ting's words weren't very sincere, they were at least 70 to 80% sincere. She couldn't help but feel a little touched. I'm telling the truth. Don't look at me just because I'm younger than you. But normally speaking, I'm not young anymore. I haven't been married for so many years and I'm really focused on my work. Of course, I have had girlfriends. But in the past, whenever I didn't accompany them enough, or when I couldn't accompany them because of work, they would be especially resentful towards me. After I met you, I've always wondered why I like you. And why I like you so much. But there's no reason to like you. I don't know what I like about you, but I just like you. As for what you said, according to my age, I've thought about it all. There's one thing I'm very sure of. That is, if I really get together with you. You definitely won't be like those little girls who get angry at me because I can't accompany you. Qianxue, I admit that I didn't like you that much at first. But in the past half a year, I feel that my liking for you hasn't decreased. Instead, it's increased. When I confirmed my feelings, when I decided to do my best to pursue you, the problems you mentioned. Whether it's the opinions of others or the problems we will encounter, I've thought about them all. So, I can tell you very calmly and rationally now. I like you. I like you very much. I like you so much that I can accept any condition you say. As for the obstacles, I've also thought about it. There might be, but if our feelings for each other are strong enough, why should we be afraid of those obstacles? His eloquence was too good, his eyes were too serious, and the words he said were really pleasant to hear. Li Qianshua's touch just now had now turned into 3 parts. She was a mature, calm and rational person. She didn't love or like Wei Ting. But at this moment, she knew that she was touched by his words. Even if she couldn't be sure of his feelings in the future, even if the two of them still couldn't be together in the end. At this moment, Wei Ting moved her. And the heart of someone who liked him couldn't be hurt. Wei Ting, Qianxue. Wei Ting, who thought she was going to reject him again, raised his hand. Can you not reject me now? Even if you really don't like me, I think you can give me a chance to perform, right? Maybe one day you will be moved by me and fall in love with me? Li Qianxue really didn't know what to say to this person. So, Qianxue, are you willing to give me this chance now? Li Qianxue was about to refuse and protect him, but when she met his gaze, she swallowed her words again. Didn't you say eat? Let's go. Qianxue, are you rejecting me? No. Li Qianxue looked at her instantly smiling face and said helplessly, I'm just returning the meal I owe you yesterday. I don't care. I'll take it that you agree. The smile on Wei Ting's face was a little childish. Li Qianxue looked at him following beside her. The smile on her face didn't disappear, and there was a subtle change in her emotions. This person and Su Qinghui were really 2 completely different types. Su Qinghui was elegant and didn't show his emotions. Most of the time he was reserved and deep. Wei Ting, however, was different. He was sunny and cheerful. There was a kind of smell that was between a man and a boy. You're staring at me. Does it mean that my face is very handsome? Wei Ting sensed Li Qianshue's gaze and moved closer to her. Li Qianxue took half a step to the side. She didn't want to see his arrogant appearance. I don't think you're very handsome. You're far worse than my son and son-in-law. Wei Ting choked and almost choked on his own saliva. Wu Jinyao, well, fine, he was a little more handsome than him. But he didn't admit that Su Yusun was more handsome than him. Your son is still a young boy. How can he be as handsome as me? Who are you calling a young boy? How did her son look like a young boy? Now that he had gone to school, whether it was the company or the family matters, they were all handled in an orderly manner at home. During the more than 10 years that Su Qinghui had intentionally or unintentionally neglected, She was already very satisfied that Su Yusin didn't go astray and could still have such achievements today. My bad words. Chinshue, don't be angry. What I mean is that although your son is handsome, he's still young and lacks maturity. I'm different. I have the charm of a mature man. Mature man? Li Chinshue suddenly thought of Su Qinghui. Back then, didn't she fall in love with Su Qinghui because of the so-called mature man's temperament? However, a man's maturity was sometimes only on the surface. The more mature he was, the more ruthless he might be. Sometimes, maturity is not a good thing. It was actually very rare to be able to maintain a pure heart. Wei Ting didn't hear this clearly. He couldn't help but get closer. What did you say? Li Chinshue realized that she actually thought of Su Qinghui at such a time. Her expression was a little uneasy for a moment. The elevator arrived at this time. She didn't answer Wei Ting's question and directly stepped into the elevator. Wei Ting shrugged helplessly and followed Li Chinshue into the elevator. Li Chinshue promised Wei Ting to have dinner with her, but she didn't dare to bring him home. She got into his car and thought for a moment. Then she asked Wei Ting to drive the car to Linyuan Pavilion. There were many high-end places in Lin City, but the few that she was familiar with were the best at keeping secrets. The car turned into the parking lot of Linyuan Pavilion and didn't stop. There were 2 cars following behind them. One was Li Chinshue's car and the driver Little Yin was driving. After Li Chinshue got out of the car, she could see the other car clearly. That was Su Qinghui's car. Had he been following her all this time? As if to prove her guess, the car door opened and Su Qinghui got out of the car. Just like that, he walked in front of Li Chinshue. At the same time, Wei Ting also got out of the car and went around to the side of the car. The two of them stood there looking at each other. Li Chinshue only looked at Su Qinghui. Her gaze was slightly cold. Are you following me? If Su Qinghui dared to say yes, she believed that she would slap him without hesitation. Not really. Su Qinghui shook his head and held the contract from the afternoon in his hand. I just remembered that there are still some details about the cooperation that I want to tell you, so I went to your company to look for you. I didn't expect that I would run into you sitting in this gentleman's car. Su Qinghui deliberately didn't address Wei Ting as this gentleman. As for whether he wanted to talk about the details of the cooperation, he wouldn't admit that it wasn't. He listened to Wei Ting yesterday and asked Li Chinshue to have dinner with him today. Chapter 7:16. Wei Ting narrowed his eyes and put his hands in his trouser pockets. He wasn't in a hurry to step forward, but waited to see how Li Chinshue would react. Li Chinshue was already quite unhappy about encountering Su Qinghui again and again in the past 2 days. She didn't even hide her disgust at his actions. What details can't be said tomorrow? Do you have to stop me on the road? I just remembered, so I came to tell you. I'm afraid I'll forget tomorrow. In my impression, you're not someone with such a bad memory. Li Chinshue was unmoved. If you really think you'll forget, you can use your phone to write it down now. You're still some time away from old age. I believe you shouldn't have amnesia at such a young age, right? Of course not. I just want to settle down as soon as possible. I thought you thought the same. You're wrong. Li Chinshue wouldn't go along with his words. It's already been delayed for so long. It doesn't matter if it's a little longer. Chinshue, Su Qinghui wanted to say that she wasn't like this in the past. She used to be very concerned about work. If there was something that wasn't resolved, she wished she could resolve it that night. It's private time now and it's dinner time. Mr. Su, President Su, I think no matter how important business is, I have the right to eat, right? I didn't mean that. Su Qinghui was thick-skinned again. I mean, maybe we can talk while we eat? No, you want to talk while we eat. But I'm afraid I won't have an appetite. Li Chinshue looked at him, who didn't intend to back down, and took a step back. Su Qinghui, if there's any business, we'll talk tomorrow. By the way, before you go to the Li Corporation, please make an appointment with my secretary. After all, not everyone is as free as you. She stabbed Su Qinghui in a neither soft nor hard way and was satisfied to see his expression change. She turned to look at Wei Ting. Let's go. Wei Ting nodded and followed Li Chinshue into Linyuan Pavilion. When he went up the steps, he didn't forget to remind her in a low voice, "Be careful of the steps." Thank you. Li Chinshue nodded. She hesitated for a second and didn't shake off Wei Ting's hand. Instead, she let him hold her hand. Su Qinghui narrowed his eyes, and his hands that were hanging by his side slightly tightened. After the two of them completely disappeared through the door, his shoulders drooped weakly. Wei Ting sat opposite Li Chinshue and looked at her expressionless face. As soon as she entered the restaurant, she flung his hand away. This was truly a thorough use of him. Unfortunately, he could not do anything about it. He even had to feel happy. After all, he still had value in front of Li Qianxue. Are you unhappy? No. To be honest, he did feel a little unhappy, but only a little. Qianxue's performance just now was really good. I find that I like you more and more. What should I do? Wei Ting, if you continue to be so glib, I can only hate you more and more. Don't be like this. Wei Ting was about to lose to her. Actually, if you really don't want to see him, I have a good idea. Huh? Be with me. Wei Ting's face was serious. Now that you have a master, he will naturally retreat. Wei Ting, this joke isn't funny. I can forget about it after hearing it. Qianxue, you really know how to break my heart. Wei Ting clutched his heart as if he was really injured. Li Qianxue watched him act, and her mood really improved a little. She knew the burden on her from the moment she was born. Old Master Li treated her as the only successor and groomed her. Although she was spoiled and willful since she was young. However, she was also strictly required to be groomed as a successor. After she grew up, she met that enemy and hadn't been happy for more than 20 years. In the past there were 2 children. Su Yusin was a boy, so he naturally didn't act coquettishly in front of her. Su Peijian was a girl. In the past she was close to her, but because of her personality she rarely acted presumptuously in front of her. Seriously speaking, it was the first time she had come into contact with someone like Wei Ting. You hurt my heart. I want to eat something delicious today and make up for my stomach. As Wei Ting spoke, he opened the electronic menu on the table. His fingers swiped across the menu on the screen while he looked at Li Qianxue. I'm too sad. What does your sadness have to do with eating? Haven't you heard of it? When the taste buds are satisfied, the body is also satisfied. When one side is satisfied, the sadness can more or less be made up for. Li Qianxue's face finally revealed a smile. Have you always been so good at talking nonsense? How is this nonsense? There's a scientific basis for this. If you don't believe me, you'll know after you eat. As Wei Ting spoke, he suddenly exclaimed and threw the electronic menu aside. He looked at Li Qianxue and said, actually, the dishes made by this kind of big restaurant look famous, but they really don't taste that good. Next time I'll take you to eat delicious food. Fortunately, I'm not picky about food. Li Qianxue actually didn't eat many things. Old Master Li paid attention to health, and she followed his taste and was very light. She said that she wasn't picky about food, but in fact she was really picky. Tomorrow. I'll take you to eat delicious food tomorrow. Wei Ting. Li Qianxue looked at the smug look on his face and said in an extremely indifferent voice, don't think that I don't know that you want to ask me out. I really don't have time tomorrow. Wei Ting's face fell. Qianxue, you were so heartless. Now great. Delicious food can't make up for it. This time, Li Qianxue finally couldn't help but laugh. This Wei Ting was actually quite interesting. The next day, Su Qinghui followed Li Qianxue's request yesterday and called Yang Rong to make an appointment. However, Li Qianxue did it on purpose. She asked Yang Rong to say that she didn't have time to see him. The 3rd and 4th days were weekends, so she didn't have time. Every time Su Qinghui called to say that he wanted to see her, he was rejected by Li Qianxue. Li Qianxue knew that her actions weren't appropriate. After all, for the sake of the company, the earlier the construction of the land in the North District, the better. However, she really didn't want to see Su Qinghui. She didn't want to see his overly smug face. She was indeed very busy. After all, the Li Corporation was so big and there was more than one project going on. She didn't want to see Su Qinghui, but Su Qinghui came looking for her. When Li Qianxue went downstairs, she had just ended the video call with Su Qingsang. The 2 little guys were different every day. They looked really cute. She really wanted to fly to Rong City and hug her 2 grandsons to get close to them. Because she saw her 2 little grandsons, Li Qianxue was in a good mood when she went downstairs. There was a faint smile on her face, but that smile froze when she saw Su Qinghui sitting on the sofa. She looked left and right. There was no one else in the living room except him. Qianxue. Su Qinghui stood up when he saw her go downstairs. Of course, he didn't miss the change in her expression when she saw him. Who allowed you to come in? Li Qianxue's tone wasn't polite. I wanted to go to the Li Corporation to look for you. You haven't been free, so I can only come to your house to look for you. His voice was calm, without a trace of accusation. Li Qianxue didn't think that she had gone overboard. Really? I've been busy with the company recently, so I really don't have time. Yes, I know you don't have time, so I came to your house. Su Qinghui said the word home quite naturally. Li Qianxue originally wanted to refute, but thinking of the difficulties she had been in the past few days and more important things, she held back. "Tell me what's the matter. You just got up. You haven't eaten yet, have you? Why don't you go eat first?" There was a faint concern in Su Qinghui's eyes, but Li Qianxue didn't appreciate it. "I haven't had breakfast yet. Since you know that this is my breakfast time, why did you come so early?" "Sorry." Su Qinghui admitted his mistake honestly. "I just wanted to see you earlier." His attitude made Li Qianxue feel that her counterattack was as powerless as hitting a piece of cotton. She looked at Su Qinghui in front of her, whose appearance hadn't changed, but whose personality had changed drastically. She felt a little annoyed. She got up and went to the dining room for breakfast. Li Qianxue didn't expect Su Qinghui to follow her into the dining room and sit in the seat he used to sit in. In the Li family's dining room, old Master Li was at the head, she was on the left, and Su Qinghui was on the right. Further down were Su Yusin and Su Peijian. Even if Su Qinghui divorced her, no one would sit in his seat after he left. Now that he was sitting there for a moment, Li Qianxue felt like she had returned to the past. Although Su Qinghui didn't love her in the past, after living together for decades, many habits had slowly merged. For example, the habit of eating breakfast, the habit of sitting once at breakfast every day. Even if Su Qinghui had nothing to talk to her about, he would talk about some important arrangements in the company. When he really entered the company, he rarely went to her office to look for her. During breakfast, it was equivalent to a small meeting between the husband and wife. In addition to work, there was also the matter of the two children. When the two children were at school, Su Qinghui would ask them about their homework or some things that happened at school. In the past, when Li Qianxue didn't know the truth, she only felt that Su Qinghui really cared about his daughter. No matter what she did at school, whether or not there were boys pursuing her, he cared about her. As for Su Yusin, he cared a little less. She only thought that it was because Su Yusin was a boy and didn't need special attention. Since she knew the reason, she was clear about Su Qinghui's favoritism. Now that she saw him sitting opposite her, Li Qianxue's expression didn't look good. "What? After leaving the Li family, you didn't even have breakfast? Do you want to come to the Li family for breakfast?" Su Qinghui ignored her sarcastic words and watched Nanny Zhang bring out the bird's nest and place it in front of Li Qianxue. Nanny Zhang was a little surprised to see Su Qinghui. Decades of habit made her speak almost instinctively. "Sir, you're back? Have you had breakfast? What do you want to eat?" "Not yet. What do you have?" "I'm fine. There's millet porridge in the kitchen. It's still hot." "Sir, wait a moment." After Nanny Zhang finished speaking, she realized that she had made the decision without authorization. She couldn't help but look at Li Qianxue. It was also out of habit that she remembered now. Su Qinghui and Li Qianxue had divorced. Li Qianxue looked at Su Qinghui, her face full of mockery. "Why are you looking at me? Since he can't even have breakfast, you can give him one. Anyway, he has eaten the Li family's food for so many years. He doesn't need one more meal." Although she was usually not polite to people, she really didn't have many times when she was so sharp. Su Qinghui knew that she was venting all her dissatisfaction on him. He wasn't annoyed. Looking at Nanny Zhang, who was a little embarrassed, his voice was very indifferent. "Nanny Zhang, please." Su Qinghui had always been very popular with the Li family. He was very polite to people. It could be said that, just like Li Qianxue now, all his sharpness was given to Li Qianxue. All his gentleness was given to others. Li Qianxue's face was cold as she watched Nanny Zhang bring out the porridge for Su Qinghui and put breakfast on the table. She suppressed her emotions and focused on eating the bird's nest in front of her. Su Qinghui, who was sitting across from him, was a little emotional at this time. It used to be like this. The two of them would sit like this and eat breakfast quietly. Although the two of them didn't talk much back then, after so many years, there was a tacit understanding between husband and wife. Most of the time, "I already knew what you were going to say after you said the first sentence." At that time, he had thought that it had nothing to do with love. It was just a tacit understanding developed through work. There was a plate of shrimp dumplings in front of him. Su Qinghui instinctively put them in her bowl. However, he remembered the previous dispute in Rong City. He never knew that Li Qianxue didn't like shrimp dumplings. She only ate it because he liked it. He really didn't understand her. As soon as he thought of this, his hand that was holding the prawn dumplings stiffened. Of course, Li Qianxue also noticed his movements. Her lips curled into a mocking smile. Naturally, Li Qianxue also thought of it. She put down the bowl in her hand and couldn't eat any more. "Qianxue." Su Qinghui hurriedly put down the bowl because of her action, and the two of them went to the living room together. Su Qinghui picked up the proposal on the coffee table and tried to sound as gentle as possible. This is the proposal. I changed it again when I went home last night. There are 2 small bugs in it and I've already corrected them. Take a look again. Maybe I can explain it to you? Li Qianxue ignored his words. She directly took the proposal and began to read it. She sat on the sofa and fell into deep thought as she looked at the 2 places that Su Qinghui had corrected. She didn't speak and Su Qinghui just looked at her. His gaze was almost greedy. He sat in the living room of the Li family, sitting opposite Li Qianxue. The quiet atmosphere almost made him hallucinate. He thought that he and Li Qianxue had returned to the past. If they could continue like this, Li Qianxue seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly looked up at Su Qinghui. When she met Su Qinghui's focused gaze, she was stunned. She saw her own reflection in his eyes. When he realized that she was looking at him, his gaze softened. "Qianxue, you're so beautiful." This was a compliment from the bottom of his heart. He was also annoyed that he had been blind before. Why couldn't he see Li Qianxue's beautiful side? Li Qianxue's expression turned a little ugly after being praised by him. She was really not used to Su Qinghui like this and she couldn't stand it. "Su Qinghui, are you here to talk about business or what?" Li Qianxue felt a little uncomfortable for a moment. She pointed at the proposal with a cold expression. "Your addition is a little useless. I've done some homework these few days and I have a different opinion." Chapter 717. Su Qinghui didn't answer her question. He just stared at her with a burning gaze. He was introverted by nature, and at this age his words and actions were naturally mature and prudent. It was very rare to see someone sizing him up without concealment. Li Qianxue forced herself not to be angry. Any reaction she gave now would only make Su Qinghui even more proud. And she wanted to reject this. "Su Qinghui, if you don't want to talk about business now, then please." Su Qinghui wasn't annoyed because of her change of attitude. Instead he sat up straight. "How is it? What do you think after I change?" No matter how much Li Qianxue disliked Su Qinghui, she was still extremely calm and self-restrained when it came to company matters. She pointed at the plan with a cold face. "It's not a bad idea to add this idea, but I've done some homework these few days. I have some other ideas." "What?" "You have this water circulation system above. Rainwater and wastewater can be collected and reused, so why not change the roof device to solar energy?" "I've considered it and found that it would affect the aesthetics. That's why I decided to use air energy." "Yes, if solar energy is placed on the roof, it will affect the aesthetics, but what if it is placed on the wall?" This was the main point she wanted to say. Li Qianxue found a pen under the coffee table and circled the key points. "I've been thinking about this for the past few days. What you said is good, but it's only relative. We can still improve and do better. For example, what I said." She didn't look at Su Qinghui. Her gaze was only on the plan. At the same time she used a pen to mark it. "Look, based on the sunshine time and orientation of Lin City, design the wall as a solar energy collector. This way it won't affect the overall aesthetics and it will achieve the effect you said." "What about the cost? Have you considered it?" "Yes." When Li Qianxue was immersed in work, she was quite calm and rational. "I asked Wei Ting. He knows this area very well. According to what I said, only the initial cost will be increased, and there will only be a maintenance fee later. The cost will be generated. Of course, people who can live in such a small community shouldn't care about this small property management fee." "Yes, what you said makes sense." Although hearing Wei Ting's name made Su Qinghui a little uncomfortable, he forced himself to ignore that name. "So I added something else." Su Qinghui flipped a page of the plan and pointed it out to her. "What do you think?" Li Qianxue looked at the words marked on it. And there were some changes. She couldn't help but turn her head to look. Su Qinghui's body was also leaning towards her. Unknowingly the two of them were much closer. She stared at the proposal and didn't notice what Su Qinghui was doing. However, Su Qinghui noticed it. From his angle he could see her face. Her facial features were bright, and her nose bridge was higher than the average person's. Li, she said, Li's face. However, Li Qianxue didn't notice his gaze. All her attention was on the proposal. "Your idea is not bad," she thought. Li's right lit was his. Kuat. Chin he was. He was looking at her. When she turned her head, their lips met. Li Qianxue was stunned. Su Qinghui didn't expect that his approach would bring such a pleasant surprise. He didn't want to retreat at all. Instead he wanted to move forward a little. Sensing Su Qinghui's actions, Li Qianxue quickly stepped back. She sat away from her previous seat in a sorry state. The two of them had been married for more than 20 years, but they had never kissed once. In her memory, the 2 times they were drunk, they had brought 2 children. As for the process, Li Qianxue subconsciously chose to forget it. She wanted to flare up, but she knew that she couldn't blame Su Qinghui for what happened just now. Li Qianxue hated that she was already so old and had suffered so much, but she was still affected by him. Thinking of this, Li Qianxue's voice turned cold. Since your company has decided to participate in this project, then choose a time to sign the contract. Okay. Su Qinghui had already taken advantage of her today. He knew when to stop. Even his gaze was much more restrained. However, have you spoken to the Tianyu group? I have. I spoke to Huo Jinyao on the phone yesterday. He will send the president of their branch over to discuss this matter. Li Qianxue's voice sounded extremely calm. The time has been set. I will let you know. Since it was a 3-party cooperation, of course, Su Qinghui also needed to be present. Even if Li Qianxue didn't want to, she couldn't avoid it. Okay. I'll wait for your news. Su Qinghui's voice was soft, and Li Qianxue could hear a hint of affection in it. She lowered her eyes and felt that it was enough for today. If there's nothing else, let's leave it at that. Li Qianxue stood up and was about to leave. Su Qinghui stood up as well. Do you have any plans today? He looked at her very eagerly. Li Qianxue's lips were pursed into a straight line, and her body was stained with a cold aura for no reason. I don't have any plans. I'll just stay at home. The weather is good. At the end of spring, the weather in Lin City was very comfortable. This kind of weather was very suitable for going out and playing. Why don't we go play basketball together? Li Qianxue turned to face him, the expression on her face unchanged. Are you going on a date with me? Su Qinghui didn't deny his plan, but he felt that Li Qianxue had been a little tense recently. I know you've been very busy recently. Isn't it good to relax at the right time? No, I don't think I need to relax. How can you not need to? Su Qinghui took 2 steps forward. Before Li Qianxue could react, he stood behind her. He put his hands on her shoulders and gently squeezed. Look, you're very tense here. You've been too tired recently. I think it's been a long time since you went to the beauty salon for a spa, right? Li Qianxue's body was stiff. She felt that Su Qinghui's hands were still on her shoulders, massaging them with moderate strength. She quickly turned around and avoided his hands. Su Qinghui. Li Qianxue's expression didn't change. She stared straight at him. I'm very tense because of your touch. I hate it when you touch me. If you don't touch me, I naturally won't be tense. The resistance on her face was too obvious. Not only was Su Qinghui not annoyed, but he even took a step forward. You mean my touch makes you tense up? Don't you even have this little self-awareness? Li Qianxue's voice was cold. Su Qinghui smiled faintly. Qianxue, I'm very happy. His reaction was too sudden, but Li Qianxue almost instantly understood what he meant, and her expression changed slightly. Su Qinghui didn't seem to know her hesitation. He took another step forward with a happy expression. I still have influence on you. I'm very happy. No matter what kind of emotion it was, as long as there was an emotional reaction, it was a good thing. It was better than her being indifferent to him. Li Qianxue's expression was ugly. The smile on Su Qinghui's face was quite glaring to her. She almost couldn't calm down anymore. I also have a reaction to cockroaches. When I see a bug appear in front of me, I also have a reaction. Su Qinghui, there's nothing to be proud of. You don't have to feel happy. Disgust, hatred, and disgust are all emotions. I know. Su Qinghui's voice lowered. But compared to you ignoring me, I'd rather you hate me. At least, hatred was also a kind of emotion, wasn't it? Then congratulations. Li Qianxue's expression was cold. With what you've done, I'll always hate you in this life. After saying this, Li Qianxue turned around and went upstairs. Su Qinghui stood in the high living room for a long time, with a complicated expression on his face. Li Qianxue was really annoyed. This kind of emotion didn't dissipate until night. When she was video chatting with Su Qingsang at night, her face unconsciously showed some emotions. Su Qingsang knew that Li Qianxue liked the 2 children, so she video chatted with Li Qianxue every night to let her see the 2 children. However, that night Li Qianxue was obviously not in a good mood. Su Qingsang held it in for a while, but in the end she couldn't help but speak. Mom, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? No, maybe I'm too tired. Li Qianxue looked at her daughter on the other side of the screen. After Su Qingsang gave birth to a pair of twins, she had rested for a few months, and her complexion was much better. Hua Jinyao was very good to her, and now even Lu Tongjia's attitude had changed. She was very happy and the corners of her eyes were full of smiles. Especially when she was with the two children, the happiness on her face came from the bottom of her heart. Qing sang? Yes. Li Qianxue had asked some questions before, but now she couldn't help but ask again, do you hate your father? Su Qingsang didn't expect to hear this question again after so long. Mom, why are you asking this out of the blue? Did Dad come to see you again? Yes. The company has a project that might require cooperation with your father's company. Although she was reluctant, it had to be like this. You know how I feel about your father. But because of the company and because of you and Yusin, we will always have the chance to meet. Mom? Su Qingsang didn't think that it was that complicated. Since it's a business cooperation, then let's do business. Qingsang? As for me, I don't hate him. She had told Hua Jinyao a long time ago that she didn't have any expectations for Su Qinghui. Without any expectations, naturally there would be no harm. She had a mother-daughter desire to be close to Li Qianxue. She also felt guilty, especially after giving birth to the children. She could understand Li Qianxue's feelings. But for Su Qinghui, all the feelings she had for so many years had been used up. She could now see Su Qinghui as a very ordinary elder. He came to Rong City to see her and the two children. She wouldn't feel particularly excited, nor would she feel particularly surprised. He was like an ordinary elder. She didn't hate him, but she couldn't get close to him. Really? Of course it's true. Su Qingsang looked at her and thought of something. Mom, do you know? Hate is actually a very intense emotion. I don't like to hate people. It's too tiring. Really? Was it too tiring to hate people? After Li Qianxue ended the video call with Su Qingsang, she sat on the bed in a daze. Hating people was very tiring, but not hating them was even more tiring. She needed an outlet to vent all the pent-up emotions in her heart. Su Qingsang could be magnanimous and let it go, but she couldn't. Her daughter and son could let it go because of their blood relationship and not hate Su Qinghui. But she couldn't. Even if she knew that it would be very tiring. But it was tiring. She really couldn't let it go. It was too difficult for her. Su Qinghui's plan for the North District was a large, intelligent community. It didn't matter if they wanted to build a factory on the land on the side. But before the other party opened the factory, if they could build the project here first, and with such a unique concept, they believed that they could be one step ahead of others. As for the factory, it was much more difficult to go through the procedures and approval than their residential area. They would build an ultra-modern, fully intelligent community a little away from the city. They would meet the needs of more and more young people. After the decision was made, the next step was to contact the Tianyu Group. There was no other way. The land in the hands of the Li Corporation was next to the Tianyu Group. Speaking of which, when Hua Jinyao was in Lin City, he also knew the plan there and knew that he wanted to build a business circle, so he took that land. The current CEO of the Lin City branch in the Tianyu region was Wang Tao. After Hua Jinyao left, the person in charge was transferred from the head office in Rong City. As one of Hua Jinyao's trusted subordinates, Wang Tao was well aware of the relationship between Su Qinghui and Li Qianxue. His attitude towards the two of them was quite polite. There was no problem with the contract, and the other party also approved of the proposal. Wang Tao made the decision after asking for Hua Jinyao's opinion. After discussing the details, all that was left was to sign the contract. It was such a big project. There was definitely a need for publicity. In the end, the three families decided to hold a grand signing ceremony as a publicity tool. No matter how much Li Qianxue disliked Su Qinghui, she had seen him a lot more recently. The two of them often had the opportunity to meet. Although Wang Tao was present every time they met, Wang Tao had a sense of propriety. He tried his best not to occupy the home court. Instead, he let Li Qianxue and Su Qinghui be the home court. As a result, Li Qianxue and Su Qinghui communicated more often because of work. Li Qianxue didn't want to see Su Qinghui, but she had no choice but to do so. For example, Su Qinghui was sitting in her office again. I've already set the signing ceremony next week. I've also asked for President Wang's opinion. I've decided to set the signing ceremony at the Blue Court Hotel. After the signing, there will be a small banquet. I'll invite all the reporters to attend. It's up to you. Li Qianxue didn't want to have a disagreement with Su Qinghui on such a small matter. The rest of the conversation was about business. Li Qianxue looked at the schedule. After confirming that there were no problems, she planned to let Su Qinghui leave. Qianxue. Su Qinghui looked at Li Qinxue with a flash of helplessness and regret in his eyes. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.